Welcome to History to Relax, where every story is a step into the quiet past. Tonight, you're invited into a world shaped not by kings or empires, but by dreams, whispers, and the old gods. This is a journey through the myths of ancient Greece, a land where every mountain watched, every river remembered, and every silence held the weight of the sacred. Over the next 15 chapters, we'll walk gently through temples and tragedies, past marble halls and haunted forests, through golden fields, endless underworlds, and cities that never stop dreaming. You'll meet the heroes and the forgotten, the prophets and the queens, the monsters and the muses, all woven into the same ancient song. This isn't just a retelling. It's a calm exploration of the world behind the myths, told slowly, softly, in easy language meant to help you unwind. Whether you're drifting off to sleep or simply seeking peace, you're in the right place. If you enjoy this kind of storytelling, we invite you to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share in the comments where you're listening from. We'd love to know how far these stories are traveling, and what part of the world you're dreaming in tonight. So take a deep breath, get comfortable, and let yourself fall into a slower rhythm, one where time doesn't rush and stories unfold like waves. This is the myth, as it was once whispered, and now it's yours to dream. Part 1: Chaos and Creation. Long before the world held mountains or oceans, before the sky arched high above the land, and before the stars found their place in the night, there was only one thing: chaos. It was not chaos as we know it now, not noise, not disorder, not a flurry of confusion. It was older than time, older than sound, older than thought. A great yawning presence of nothing, both endless and still. Chaos did not stir. It did not speak. It simply was. An open mouth of silence, a vast and formless void, stretching in every direction with neither beginning nor end. There were no rules in chaos. No direction, no color, no light, no heat. It had no up and no down. No breath stirred the emptiness, and no memory lived within it. But all stories must begin somewhere, and it was from this vast nothing that something, slowly, subtly, began to take shape. The first was Gaia, the earth. Not a planet, not a place, but a presence, ancient, vast, and alive. She was the ground itself, though there was no one to tread upon her. Her body was rich with potential, fertile and strong. She had no face, no voice, but she was patience made form. Gaia stretched wide beneath the void, still and unshaken, waiting for something more. Then came Tartarus, the deep abyss. A shadow beneath Gaia's form, darker even than chaos. It was not merely a hole or a cavern, it was depth itself, the bottomless space where dread and distance were born. It would one day become a prison, a place of unending night. But in the beginning, it simply waited, echoing in silence. Next came Eros, not the god of romantic longing we might picture now, but the force of attraction itself, the bond that would pull beings together, the thread that would bind chaos into form. Eros was desire, but not yet desire for beauty or touch. It was the first breath of movement in stillness, a silent tug at the fabric of the void. And with these came Nyx, the night. She arrived cloaked in shadow so deep that even chaos recoiled. Nyx did not bring fear, but quiet. Her veil wrapped the endless black in stillness deeper than silence. She was followed by Erebus, the darkness of the underworld, who joined her in that early hush. From their union, ether was born, the upper air, light and pure, and Hemera, the day, who would one day chase her mother endlessly across the sky. Together, this first family, strange and invisible, shaped the rhythm of night and day, not through clocks or calendars, but through story and soul. But it was Gaia who began to act. From the rich soil of her body, she created a companion. Uranus, the sky. He was both her child and her consort. Vast and star-strewn, he stretched across her, arching high above the still silence of the earth. And when he hovered above her, the world finally took its first shape, the heavens curved above, the earth steady below. Gaia continued to create. She formed the mountains, sharp and wild, rising like bones from her skin. She called forth Pontus, the sea, whose waves surged with a will of their own, long before ships or sails had ever been dreamed. And with Uranus, she bore a new generation, the Titans. Great beings, strong and strange, shaped by the raw force of the world itself. There were 12 Titans in all, 6 sons, 6 daughters, and each of them was vast, elemental, and unrelenting. Among the sons were Oceanus, who became the encircling river, wrapping the world like a silver serpent of water. A Hyperion, lord of light, whose gaze could pierce stone. Acoeus, the seeker, full of questions that no one yet knew how to ask. Acrius, silent and grim, his mind attuned to constellations. Iapetus, who would become the ancestor of mortal men. And Cronus, the youngest, sharpest, and most dangerous. The daughters were no less mighty. Athea, radiant and proud, the mother of sun and moon. Rhea, wise and patient, future mother of the gods. Themis, bearer of divine law, unseen but felt in all things. Mnemosyne, memory given form, who would one day whisper poems into the hearts of mortals. Phoebe, shining with hidden knowledge. Antesis, who nourished the rivers and sea. But Gaia's creation did not end there. From her deepest pains, she gave birth to monsters, not for chaos or cruelty, but as a truth of balance. First came the Cyclopes, Brontes, Sterapes, and Arges, each with a single blazing eye in the center of their foreheads. These were not beasts of wild rage, but craftsmen of storms, hammering thunderbolts in a forge of fire and sky. Then came the Hecatoncheirs, the 100-handed ones, 3 giants of unspeakable size, each with 50 heads and 100 arms. Their power could shake the very core of the earth, and even the stars trembled when they stirred. Uranus, though lord of the sky, looked upon these monstrous children with fear. He did not see their strength or potential. He saw only a threat. So he took them, the Cyclopes and the 100-handed ones, and with terrible force, he thrust them back into Gaia's womb, burying them deep in the earth, beneath layers of rock and silence. Gaia groaned. The weight of their bodies pressed against her, and with each breath she felt pain, not only from their struggle, but from Uranus's betrayal. The sky, her companion, had become her jailer. Night after night, he descended upon her, pressing his vast form across her body, ignoring her suffering, deaf to her cries. She endured. For a time. But Gaia is not only the earth. She is persistence. And from that pain, she began to plot. From her own flesh, she crafted a weapon, not of metal, for no forge yet existed, but a sickle of unyielding flint, sharp as vengeance and jagged as broken bone. She called her sons to her. She told them of her suffering, of their brothers buried in darkness, of Uranus's cruelty. One by one, the Titans looked away, unwilling to defy the father who had given them the sky. All but one. Cronus, the youngest. Clever, calculating, and cold. He stepped forward. He took the sickle from Gaia's hands. "I will do it," he said. And so Gaia set her trap. She waited, as she always had, until Uranus descended once more. And in the dark of night, Cronus struck. The sickle flashed through silence, and the sky split open with Uranus's cry. Blood spilled upon the earth and sea, staining creation with sorrow. From the foam of the sea where the blood fell, something new was born. Aphrodite, radiant, terrible, and irresistible. Love and beauty given flesh, born not from warmth, but from violence. She rose from the surf, stepping ashore at Cyprus, her eyes calm, her power boundless. From the drops that spilled on the earth came more still, the Furies, cloaked in vengeance, who would forever haunt oathbreakers and murderers. The giants, massive and proud, who would one day rise against the gods, and the Melee, nymphs of the ash tree, who would guard the old wild places. Uranus, wounded and dethroned, faded into the sky. But before he vanished, he cast a curse. Just as I was overthrown by my son, so too shall you be overthrown by yours. Cronus heard those words, and though he now held the throne of the cosmos, a crown born of blood and flint, he could not forget them. He buried the sickle in the earth, hiding it from sight. He sat atop his throne, king of the heavens, lord of the Titans, and ruled through a golden age. But already, beneath the soil, seeds of fate stirred. The sky no longer pressed so tightly upon the earth. Gaia breathed again. But the story, like the world, was only beginning. Part 2. The Age of the Titans. The sickle had fallen. The sky had bled. And the world, that young, dreaming place, now belonged to the Titans. With Uranus cast into the stars, his cry still echoing faintly in the wind, Cronus stood tall upon the bones of old power. He held no crown of gold, no scepter carved from crystal or flame. His authority was written into the breath of the world, silent, immense, unquestioned. He had freed the Titans from the weight of a tyrant. He had dared what no other son had dared. He was not merely a ruler. He was now fate's instrument. The heavens above no longer pressed so tightly against Gaia's skin. For the first time since the birth of time itself, the earth could breathe freely. The mountains stood taller. The seas stirred with calm delight. Trees opened their leaves to light not yet named, and rivers meandered across untouched lands like silver thoughts finding their way into form. Cronus ruled not with cruelty, not at first, but with distance. He was not prone to laughter, nor to fury. He watched. He listened. And somewhere beneath that calm exterior lived the quiet thrum of a warning, his father's curse echoing endlessly within him. As I was overthrown by my son, so too shall you be overthrown by yours. He could not silence it. Even as the golden age bloomed around him, Cronus was haunted. His father had spoken it with blood in his mouth and stars in his eyes, and Gaia had heard it too. The very earth murmured of destiny's return. Still, Cronus built. He brought harmony to the Titans, setting each of his brothers and sisters to rule over the vast forces of the cosmos. The world, in its infancy, had grown wide. The Titans needed purpose. To Oceanus, he gave the great outer river that surrounded the world. It lapped endlessly against the edge of the earth, feeding every stream and sea. Oceanus, ever patient, did not challenge Cronus's reign. He flowed through existence like a silent oath. To Hyperion, he gave dominion over light. From Hyperion came the fire of the stars and the golden eye of the sun. He watched over the heavens with a gaze that could pierce mist and shadow, and in time he would father Aelios, the sun, Selene, the moon, and the dawn. To Coeus, seeker of truth and bearer of the celestial axis, Cronus gave the northern sky, where stars wheeled in silent patterns. It was said that Coeus knew the names of constellations before they were born, and that he alone could look beyond time. Crius governed the borders of the heavens, where constellations hung heavy with silence. He was the least known, but the most steady, watching where heaven bent to meet the edge of the void. Iapetus, shaper of mortality, became a master of the western winds. In time, his line would birth titanic minds: Prometheus, foresight; Epimetheus, afterthought; Atlas, who would carry the sky; and Menoetius, prideful and doomed. And Cronus himself sat at the center of all, clutching tightly to the heavens, earth, and time. The Titanesses held no lesser roles. They were the breath and balance of all that followed. Thea, radiant and bright, bore the light that Hyperion shaped. Her children gleamed in the heavens. Rhea, the Great Mother, moved with quiet power. She was not only the consort of Cronus, but the balance to his suspicion, the silence to his unease. She watched the world grow with a calm that could split stone. The Miss, the unseen hand of law and order, became the very heartbeat of justice. Where she stepped, fairness bloomed. Where she gazed, lies withered. Mnemosyne, soft-spoken and ever-listening, became the memory of the world. Her thoughts bloomed into language, song, and prophecy. She remembered not only the past, but the shadows of what had not yet occurred. Phoebe, bright with knowledge, whispered secrets into the stars. Her thoughts ran deep and quiet. Her light was not the sun's blaze, but the glint of understanding in a still room. And Tessis, warm and enduring, nourished every river, every spring, every falling tear. She was the quiet keeper of life's flow, the mother of waters. This was the age of the Titans. It was not filled with thunder or war, but with silence and growth. The world unfolded like a great, slow blossom. Forests rose, unfurling leaf and root across the untouched lands. Clouds drifted with lazy dignity through the high air, untouched by storms. And in the hollow places of the earth, fires stirred, not wild, but dreaming, waiting for the touch of life to shape them. This was the Golden Age, as the mortals who came later would name it. A time of peace and bounty. A time before hunger and war. The earth gave its fruit without asking. The wind was warm. No frost nipped at the bones of the world. And during this age, mortals came into being. Their origin is told in many ways. Some say Gaia shaped them. Others claim it was Prometheus, child of Iapetus, who sculpted them from clay and breathed into them the warmth of thought. These early mortals did not till the soil, for the earth fed them without effort. They did not fear beasts, for none hunted in those days. They did not grow old or weary. When their time came, they did not fall into sickness or scream into the night. They simply faded, like candles at dawn. The Titans watched them with a kind of distant interest. Cronus, though ever cautious, allowed them to flourish. Rhea, the nurturing force, watched over them gently. The Miss guided them with invisible hands. Mnemosyne planted the first sparks of language in their minds. It was a time of closeness between mortal and divine, a time when men and women walked the meadows of the world without knowing the names of gods, and yet felt their presence in every gust of wind. And so the world turned. Slowly, peacefully. But peace, as the old stories warn, is never eternal. Rhea, wife and sister to Cronus, began to bear children. At first, there was joy. But Cronus remembered. He remembered the blood of Uranus staining the waves. He remembered his father's scream. He remembered the curse. As I was overthrown by my son, so too shall you be overthrown by yours. And so Cronus acted. Not in passion, but in fear. When Rhea gave birth to her first child, Hestia, goddess of the hearth, Cronus took the child from her arms and swallowed her whole. Not with violence, not with cruelty, but with cold determination. He opened his mouth and devoured her, sending her to the depths of his belly where no light reached and no cry could be heard. Rhea was struck silent. But what could she do? He was the king of the cosmos. Then came Demeter, child of harvest, swallowed. Then Hera, proud and watchful, swallowed. Then Hades, dark-eyed and solemn, swallowed. And Poseidon, strong and deep as the sea, swallowed. 5 children, 5 lives extinguished not by blade or battle, but by a father's fear. Rhea wept in secret. Her grief was deep, but it bore no fruit. Cronus told her it was necessary, that it was fate, that it was wisdom, that no throne could endure unless guarded by sacrifice. He was not cruel. He was simply unwilling to suffer what his father had. But by the time she felt her sixth child stir within her, Rhea made a decision. This child would not be eaten. She fled from Cronus. She crossed mountains, rivers, fields still untouched by mortal feet. She sailed upon the back of a great bird, or walked into the mists of the western sea. The myths vary, but all agree she came at last to the island of Crete, where the mountain Ida rose like a great sleeping god. There, in the caves beneath the mountain, Rhea gave birth to her last child. A boy. She named him Zeus. He was not like the others. From the first breath he took, the air shifted. His cries echoed in stone like thunder. His eyes opened wide, searching, unafraid. Rhea wrapped a stone in swaddling cloth and gave it to Cronus in place of her child. He did not question her. He swallowed the stone, believing the threat was past. Meanwhile, beneath Mount Ida, Zeus was hidden. He was fed by the goat Amalthea, whose milk flowed rich and wild. Warriors known as the Curetes danced and clashed their shields together to drown out his cries. Nymphs sang lullabies older than language. And Gaia herself bent her gaze toward the cave where the child lay, silent and watchful. Years passed. The Golden Age continued above, unmarred on the surface. But beneath, the future coiled like a spring. Zeus grew quickly. He drank the milk of Amalthea, and when the goat died, he took one of her horns and turned it into the cornucopia, a symbol of endless bounty. He skinned her and raised her hide among the stars, honoring the life that had nourished him. But he did not forget the stories whispered into his dreams. Stories of siblings lost, of a father who feared fate, of a world waiting to be remade. The time would come when he would rise. But not yet. For now, Cronus sat upon his throne. The heavens held their breath. And deep within his belly, 5 children stirred. Part 3. The Rebellion of Zeus. In the hush beneath Mount Ida, far from the throne of the Titans and the gaze of Cronus, a boy came of age. The cave that cradled him echoed with quiet wisdom, its stone walls steeped in the breath of the earth. Winds moved gently through narrow cracks, whispering secrets too ancient for words. Zeus, lastborn of the 6 children of Rhea, grew strong in that hidden place, not only in limb, but in thought, in will, and in silence. His guardians never spoke the full truth aloud, but the air around him carried it. Every rustle of a leaf, every creak of the mountain, every shift in the stars murmured of fate. Zeus knew, long before he was told, that he was not the only child of his mother. The world whispered of 5 siblings swallowed by fear, buried not in soil but in flesh. That knowledge rooted itself in him, quiet at first, like a seed beneath winter frost, and then, as years passed, it stirred. Rhea, watching from afar, never approached directly. Her touch would reveal too much. But she sent gifts in quiet ways. She entrusted the Curetes to train him in secret, warriors who danced with clashing bronze and stamped their feet in wild rhythms that kept his presence hidden. She called upon dryads and nymphs to bring him food, to teach him songs older than fire. She placed in his dreams the memory of a throne stolen from truth. Gaia, too, turned her gaze toward him. The great Earth Mother, who had once guided Cronus to rebellion, now watched the sun rise in shadow. She had not forgotten Uranus's fall, nor the price paid in blood. In Zeus, she saw not only strength but direction, a path not forged from fear, but chosen with care. Zeus came to manhood tall and broad-shouldered, his eyes carrying the weight of things not yet spoken. He walked the mountain paths barefoot, learning not just the feel of stone and moss but the meaning behind each shape in the clouds. He did not grow restless. He grew ready. When the time came, Gaia herself spoke to him, not with a voice, but with a stirring in the roots beneath his feet. She guided him to Metis, daughter of Oceanus, a titan known not for war or strength, but for wisdom. She shimmered like moonlight and moved like thought, elusive, brilliant, and calm. From her, Zeus learned to plan, to think in circles rather than lines. Metis did not teach him to fight. She taught him to win. Together, they shaped a quiet rebellion. There would be no armies, no banners, no great clash of weapons. Not yet. The throne of Cronus was held by fear, and it would be unraveled by cunning. To free the swallowed gods, Zeus would need to descend not into the depths of Tartarus, but into the very heart of the enemy, the halls of his father. He would not do so as a son. He would arrive in disguise. Metis prepared a draught, thick as honey, bitter as bark, steeped in roots found only beneath the bones of the oldest trees. This potion did not kill. It stirred. It reached backward through time and called up what had been buried, what had been swallowed, what had been denied. With quiet steps, Zeus left Crete. He crossed the lands under a false name, cloaked as a cupbearer or servant, depending on the tale. He did not demand entry. He waited, blending into the quiet corners of Cronus's court, where the winds no longer dared to howl. He moved through the halls like mist, unseen but watching, listening to the heavy silence that weighed down every wall. Cronus, king of the cosmos, had grown older. The crown he bore sat heavily. Time itself bent around him, for he had become its master. But that mastery came at a price. Each moment reminded him of the curse he had hoped to outpace. The laughter he once shared with Rhea had long since faded. His children were gone. His sleep brought no rest. And though he did not know it, his undoing stood at his side. One evening, as starlight traced gentle lines across the floor, Zeus offered his father the draught. It shimmered in the goblet like dusk poured into glass. Cronus, too weary to question, drank. The effect was swift. A shudder moved through him, not of pain, but of remembrance. His body recoiled. His breath caught. And from the depths of his being, a groan escaped, long and low, like the echo of a mountain collapsing inward. Then, piece by piece, the swallowed gods returned. First came Hestia, light of the hearth. She emerged without anger, her flame quiet and steady. Next was Demeter, full of green and gold, the scent of harvest clinging to her form. Then Hera, regal and proud, her gaze sharp as the edge of judgment. Hades followed, shadows trailing him like a cloak. And last came Poseidon, tall and salt-breathed, the murmur of tides in his voice. They stood not as infants, but fully grown, shaped by the timelessness within their father's prison. Each carried the presence of a god. Each stepped into the world as if it had been waiting just for them. Cronus collapsed. He did not die, but he understood, in that moment, that his reign had been broken. Not by violence, not by war, but by his own son's patience. Zeus revealed himself then. He did not raise his voice. He did not strike a pose of triumph. He simply stood before the man who had feared him more than anything else in creation. Cronus looked into his eyes and saw not rebellion, but inevitability. Yet power, once challenged, does not yield without resistance. Though Cronus had lost the advantage of surprise, he still commanded the Titans, vast beings with dominion over the shape and flow of the world. Word spread quickly through the old halls. The balance had shifted. The Titans gathered. Upon Mount Arthres, their seat of ancient power, they prepared for war. Some hesitated, Oceanus remained apart, too old or too weary for civil strife. The Mys and Mnemosyne, touched by the justice and memory of Gaia, stood silently by. But others joined Cronus. Iapetus, bound to pride. Crius, cold and deliberate. Hyperion, ablaze with ancestral fire. Coeus, who gazed into the constellations and still chose his brother's side. They took up arms not forged but formed, weapons of thought, of essence, of thunder and stone. Meanwhile, the children of Rhea, now gods in their own right, made their stand upon a new mountain, Olympus, high in the north, untouched by war, its peaks sharp as breath. There, Zeus gathered his siblings. Hestia lit the fire at its center. Hera carved order into their ranks. Poseidon listened to the wind. Hades stood at the edge of the clouds. Demeter wove prayers from seeds. They were not ready. Cronus's army outnumbered them, outmatched them, and carried the weight of time. But Zeus had not finished listening to Gaia. She whispered again, this time of what lay hidden. Long ago, Cronus had sealed away the Cyclopes and the 100-handed ones, the same mistake his father had made before him. Buried in Tartarus, these ancient beings still stirred, their eyes burning and their arms trembling with fury. If Zeus would free them, the war might yet turn. He did not hesitate. With his brothers, Zeus descended into the depths of the underworld. The air grew heavy. The walls wept stone. Silence here was not absence, it was pressure. Tartarus yawned like a wound that had never healed. Chains wrapped around wrists the size of cliffs. The Cyclopes blinked once, their single eyes glowing dim and wild. The 100-handed ones whispered their rage in languages too old for words. Zeus broke the locks. Stone split and groaned. Light touched the forgotten. And they rose. The Cyclopes, grateful and filled with purpose, gave gifts. To Zeus, they crafted the thunderbolt, a weapon of sky and fire, the voice of storm, the wrath of heaven-given form. To Poseidon, they gave the trident, capable of stirring oceans into madness or stillness. To Hades, they offered a helm of darkness, which could hide the wearer from sight and thought. The 100-handed ones needed no tools. Their fury was weapon enough. With 50 heads each and 100 arms, they hurled mountains, caught lightning in their palms, and shattered the old stone of Mount Arthres with every stride. So began the Titanomachy, the war of the gods. It lasted 10 years. The sky split open again and again with thunder. Rivers boiled and changed course. Trees burned not from fire, but from pressure. The moon turned her face away for nights at a time. Mortals, still young and few, watched the heavens blaze and wept without knowing why. On Olympus, the gods fought with resolve. On Arthres, the Titans clung to what had always been. Each side claimed righteousness. Each side spilled eternity upon the soil. In the end, Gaia tilted the balance. The earth cracked open beneath the Titans, and the 100-handed ones struck with a force older than rage. Cronus fell last. Not slain, but broken, wrapped in chains not of iron but of time and silence. He and his followers were cast down into Tartarus, imprisoned behind bronze gates that would never rust or open. Only a few Titans were spared. Prometheus, who had offered quiet counsel. Epimetheus, who followed him. The Mys, who knew balance must be preserved. And Mnemosyne, whose memory was needed to carry the truth. The war ended not with a cry of triumph, but with a long exhale. Zeus stood atop Olympus, thunderbolt in hand. He did not claim the world by inheritance, but by choice and deed. Yet as he looked across the battered skies, the old warning remained. Not Cronus's voice, but something deeper. Even gods must watch their thrones. And fate, though quiet, never forgets. Part 4. The New Order. When the final echoes of battle faded and the skies cleared of fire and ash, the world exhaled. The Great War had ended, not with fanfare or parades, but with stillness. Mount Olympus stood tall and unburned, while Mount Arthres, the former seat of the Titans, lay cracked and crumbling, its slopes scarred by time and defeat. Below, the earth stretched quietly. Rivers resumed their meandering paths. Forests stirred with cautious breath. High above, stars reclaimed their steady rhythm. And in the space between what had been and what was to come, the The victors of the Titanomachy stood facing a future that had yet to be shaped. Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades, the three brothers who had wrested the world from their father, now faced a challenge unlike any battle they had known. The throne of the cosmos did not belong to one by right. No crown had been passed down. No written law dictated its owner. The victory was shared, and so too must be the burden. There would be no civil war among them. Not after all they had endured together. Not after standing shoulder to shoulder in fire and shadow. Instead, they chose to divide the cosmos. Not through struggle. Not with envy. But by lot. The casting of lots was sacred, a rite older than language, older than the Titans themselves. It was not a game of chance. It was a submission to fate, a declaration that even gods would bow to the greater order of things. They gathered at the summit of Mount Olympus, where the wind whispered like prophecy through silver air. Each held their breath. Stones were drawn, and the world shifted. To Zeus, the eldest in might and voice, fell the sky, the wide and open heavens, the air that brushed mountaintops, the vault of stars, the seat of storms and lightning. From this moment on, he would be king not because he demanded it, but because the sky itself answered to him. His throne would be built in cloud and marble, and thunder would speak his will. To Poseidon, the middle brother, came the sea, vast and unknowable, filled with tides and monsters, treasures and wreckage. He took up the trident gifted by the Cyclopes and ruled not only over the waves, but over the rivers, lakes, and springs that wound through the land. Beneath the surface, he built a palace of coral and pearl, a kingdom hidden in the deep where only the bravest dared follow. And to Hades, the last drawn but not least in strength, fell the Underworld, the realm of shadows and silence, where the souls of mortals drifted after death. It was not a reward many would seek, yet Hades accepted it without anger. His rule would be solitary, his halls hidden beneath the earth. But he would become a king no less than his brothers. He would keep the balance, guard the gates, ensure that none who passed the threshold of life returned without permission. The earth itself, Gaia's own flesh, was left as neutral ground. No single god could claim it, for it was the space between, shared by all, walked by gods and mortals alike. Forests, mountains, fields, and cities would rise upon its skin, but the heart of the earth belonged to none. In this shared realm, fate would continue to write its stories. Thus, the cosmos was ordered, not by force, but by agreement. The sky, the sea, and the underworld each had their king. And upon Mount Olympus, a new court began to form. Unlike the Titans before them, the Olympians were not distant or cold. They did not rule from shadow or tower, but from a place that touched both heaven and horizon. Olympus was not a fortress. It was a threshold, a sacred bridge between mortal and divine. The halls of the mountain were vast and radiant, made not of stone but of marble that shimmered with light. No wind howled here. No snow fell. The air was always calm. And though no mortal could ascend its heights uninvited, the gods walked freely through its golden corridors. At the heart of Olympus sat Zeus, king of the gods. He held court not as a tyrant, but as a shepherd of order. His throne shimmered with thunderclouds and lightning danced along his fingers. He listened more than he spoke. Yet when his voice rose, it rolled like distant storms across the heavens. He did not rule alone. Beside him stood Hera, his sister and wife, goddess of queenship, family, and unbreakable vows. Her eyes saw what others missed. Her silence often spoke louder than thunder. Though her name would come to be spoken with jealousy and vengeance, she was not born bitter. She was born proud. And that pride would shape the fate of gods and mortals alike. Hestia, eldest of the 6 siblings and first to be freed, took no throne. She chose instead the hearth, the center of every home, every temple, every fire lit in prayer or comfort. She did not seek power or fame. She burned quietly, watching the world with gentle patience. Demeter, bringer of grain and growth, walked between Olympus and earth. Her presence warmed the fields. Her tears brought rain. She was the mother of the harvest, and her footsteps coaxed seeds to life. Poseidon visited often, though his home lay beneath the waves. He spoke little at council, but his anger was feared. When he raised his trident, mountains split and seas boiled. Yet he was not always wrathful. His moods, like the tides, shifted with the moon. Hades, though rarely seen above, was always felt. His absence was a presence of its own. He sent no messengers. He required no tribute. But when the gods gathered, a hush fell, not from fear, but respect. For he alone kept the boundaries none dared cross. In time, others joined this sacred gathering. From the mind of Zeus and the womb of Metis came Athena, goddess of wisdom and war. Her birth was unlike any other. Zeus, fearing a prophecy that her child would surpass him, swallowed Metis whole while she was still with child. Yet within him, she grew. One day, his skull split open, whether by pain or divine necessity, and Athena stepped forth fully formed, clad in bronze, spear in hand, eyes sharp and unwavering. She brought reason to passion, strategy to strength, and dignity to conflict. Apollo and Artemis, twin children of Zeus and the Titan Leto, followed next. Their birth had been troubled. Leto wandered across the earth, rejected by every land for fear of Heros' wrath. At last, the floating island of Delos gave her sanctuary. There, in the gentle shade of palm trees, she bore Apollo, god of light, music, and prophecy, and Artemis, goddess of the hunt and the moon. Apollo was golden, radiant, his voice a melody that stirred hearts and swayed minds. Artemis was silent, swift, her arrows precise, her gaze cool and untouched by desire. Together, they moved between realms, guardians of balance. Then came Mars, god of war, born of Zeus and Hera. He was fire and fury, blood and iron. His presence brought battle, his breath summoned chaos. Yet he was not celebrated. Many of the gods viewed him with disdain. For while war may be necessary, it is rarely noble. Hephaestus, the smith, came next, son of Hera alone, or of both Hera and Zeus, depending on the tale. Cast from Olympus at birth for his twisted form, he fell into the sea, raised by nymphs, and learned to master fire. He returned not with vengeance, but with craft. His forge burned beneath mountains. His hands shaped armor, palaces, and machines that breathed. Though limping, he was among the most powerful of all. Aphrodite, goddess of love and beauty, did not come from womb or marriage. She rose from the sea, born of the foam left in the wake of Uranus's fall. Her smile toppled kings. Her laughter stirred longing in every heart. Even the gods struggled to look away. She was charm without apology, and desire without restraint. Hermes, son of Zeus and the nymph Maia, arrived last of the early gods. He was clever, swift, and mischievous. Born at dawn, he stole by noon, and sang by sunset. His tongue was silver. His feet bore wings. He moved between worlds with ease, guiding souls to the underworld and messages to Olympus. Wherever borders existed, Hermes blurred them. These were the Olympians. Not saints, not idols, but powers, flawed, radiant, immense. They quarreled. They fell in love. They raged and wept. They built and destroyed. And through it all, they shaped the lives of mortals below. For though the war was over, the world remained young. Mortals now walked the earth in greater number. They built fires, told stories, raised stones in worship. The gods watched them, curious, protective, and at times envious. Some descended in disguise, walking among shepherds and kings. Others sent dreams or omens. And still others remained distant, content to rule from afar. The golden age had passed, but peace lingered, tentative, quiet, like the hush before a breeze. The Olympians stood on high, but the wheel of fate never stops turning. Not for titans, not for gods, not for any throne. And as the stars returned to their steady dance, the world braced for the next chapter, one not of order, but of fire, defiance, and the dangerous gift of light. Part 5. Prometheus and the Gift of Fire. There are moments in every age when the course of the world changes, not with war, nor with thunder, but with the quiet resolve of a single hand. In the early years of the Olympian rule, when the sky had only recently settled above the mountains and the winds no longer carried the scent of ash, such a moment stirred into being. It did not come from Zeus, nor from any throne on Mount Olympus. It began far from the golden halls of the gods, in the heart of one who had always walked between the worlds. Prometheus was his name. A titan by blood, born of Iapetus and Clymene, he was older than the Olympians, yet unchained when Cronus fell. During the war that split heaven and earth, Prometheus had chosen no side blindly. He watched the tide of fate with care, gauging the wind, reading the sky, and in time, he placed his quiet allegiance with the gods who would come to rule. Not out of loyalty, and not from fear. He followed reason, guided by a gift he alone possessed in full: foresight. His brother, Prometheus, was his opposite: brash, careless, often kind, but rarely wise. Where Prometheus looked ahead, Prometheus gazed behind. The two were inseparable, yet always in tension, like the push and pull of a wave against the shore. Though he had stood apart during the height of the Titanomachy, Prometheus earned a place of respect among the new gods. He offered counsel when asked, remained silent when it served peace, and wandered the earth more often than he lingered in Olympus. He saw the world not as a domain to be ruled, but as a place to be shaped. And so, while Zeus turned his attention to the skies, while Poseidon calmed the seas and Hades arranged the realms of the dead, Prometheus walked the green slopes of the waking earth. There, he saw something the others did not. He saw emptiness. The rivers flowed, the winds danced, and the sun rose over forests so thick they swallowed the horizon. Birds sang. Trees reached upward in still prayer. Mountains watched in silence. Yet something essential was missing. No voice had yet risen in song. No hand had traced symbols in the dust. No eyes stared upward and wondered why the stars moved the way they did. Prometheus paused. He knelt beside a riverbank where clay pooled in soft spirals. With slow fingers, he shaped a figure, fragile, upright, incomplete. It did not breathe, but it seemed to wait. As twilight deepened, he made another, then another. Soon, the shore bore rows of quiet forms, their limbs smoothed by care, their faces turned toward the darkening sky. He breathed upon them, and they opened their eyes. Thus were mortals born, not from divine light or thunder, but from clay and thought, from patience and breath. They were small, soft-skinned, and entirely without power. Their fingers held no claws. Their mouths bore no fangs. Their limbs tired quickly. The world, vast and untamed, offered no sanctuary. Beasts prowled the forests. Storms clawed at their huts. Hunger visited often. Still, Prometheus watched them with quiet pride. These beings, fragile as they were, carried something no beast possessed: a flicker of reflection, the beginning of memory, the roots of curiosity. They built without being told. They dreamed before they understood what dreaming was. He guided them gently. From the shadows of trees, he showed them which berries would nourish and which would poison. He taught them to shape stones into blades, to carve bone into needles. They made rope from sinew, shelters from branches, and in the cold nights, They huddled together, trembling, but alive. Zeus noticed. To the king of the gods, these new creatures were peculiar. Interesting, perhaps, but not vital. He regarded them as animals with the faint echo of divine breath. Useful, maybe, but beneath concern. He had ordered the world in balance. He had drawn lines between heaven and earth, life and death, God and mortal. These clay figures, for all their trembling bravery, were not meant to blur those lines. When Prometheus approached Olympus to ask a gift for them, Zeus denied him. "Let them struggle," the king said. "Let them remember their place. They are not gods, and they must not become like gods." Prometheus bowed. He did not argue. He did not raise his voice. But his silence was not consent. Among all the gifts the gods had kept for themselves, one alone could raise mortals from weakness to wonder. It was not wealth, nor strength, nor eternal life. It was something far more dangerous. Something alive, shifting, and untamed. Fire. It lived in the forge of Hephaestus, flickering beside the anvils where gods shaped weapons and tools. It danced in the hearth of Hestia, glowing softly in the center of Olympus, warming every council with its gentle light. Fire was more than heat. It was transformation. It turned raw meat into nourishment. It hardened clay. It carved the night into stories. It allowed thought to become action. Zeus had forbidden it. And so, Prometheus waited. On a night when Olympus lay sleeping, he climbed the path none dared tread without invitation. The stars bore witness but did not speak. At the edge of Hephaestus's forge, he reached into the coals. In his hand, he held a fennel stalk, hollow and strong, perfect for smuggling flame. He dipped it into the embers. The stalk did not burn, not yet. The fire inside it glowed softly, hidden. He descended. He crossed fields and valleys until he found the mortals once more, huddled, shaking, wide-eyed in the darkness. Without a word, he knelt and placed the stalk upon the earth. He whispered a word they did not know, and with a breath, the fire came to life. Orange light bloomed against the black sky. The people stepped back, afraid. Then, slowly, they came closer. Hands reached out, palms open. The heat kissed their skin. They stared into the glow, seeing for the first time a world where shadows fled. That night, they did not tremble. That night, they told stories. From that moment on, everything changed. They learned to build fires of their own. They cooked. They warmed the sick. They kept beasts at bay. Sparks flew from hammer to anvil. Pottery hardened. Bread rose. Smoke curled above their homes, signaling not danger, but life. Zeus woke to the scent of smoke. He knew at once what had happened. His rage was vast and immediate. The gift had not been Prometheus's to give. In the king's eyes, the Titan had broken the natural order. The boundary between God and mortal had blurred. These creatures of mud and memory now possessed a divine power, and with it, they would grow. Zeus summoned the other gods. They debated, thunderclouds gathering above Olympus. Some saw the fire as theft, others as compassion. But Zeus had made his decision. Prometheus would pay. Still, punishment alone was not enough. Zeus devised a gift. Not for Prometheus. For man. One wrapped in silk, shaped with beauty, and brimming with consequence. Pandora. Hephaestus sculpted her body from clay, soft and flawless. Aphrodite gave her charm. Hermes placed cunning in her smile. Athena clothed her in silver. Each god contributed something: grace, voice, poise, wonder. Her name meant all gifted. She was beautiful beyond words. No mortal had seen anything like her. She was not made to love or lead, but to tempt, to challenge, to shift the course of mortal life. Zeus placed in her hands a jar, later called a box in the retellings. Inside it, unseen, lay every sorrow the gods had chosen to keep locked away. Pain, grief, jealousy, war, famine, madness, aging, death. The jar was sealed. Pandora descended to the world and found Prometheus, Prometheus's brother. Though warned, he welcomed her gladly. She smiled. She stayed. She waited. And then, drawn by curiosity, the last gift of the gods, she opened the jar. What escaped was not noise, but weight. Invisible sorrows spilled into the world like wind through open shutters. Hunger found the bellies of children. Cold gnawed at old bones. Love twisted into envy. Health gave way to illness. Trust turned to suspicion. And time, once gentle, became a race. By the time Pandora closed the jar, only one thing remained inside: hope. It fluttered at the bottom, fragile and flickering. She stared at it, uncertain. Some say she kept it sealed. Others claim she let it go. Either way, hope lingered, small, stubborn, and quiet. The world had changed again. Prometheus, meanwhile, did not flee. He stood before the gods and met their judgment with eyes unflinching. Zeus did not grant him death. That would have been mercy. Instead, he bound the Titan to a rock at the edge of the world. Some say in the Caucasus, others say upon a peak lost to memory. Chains held him fast, crafted from divine will and metal beyond breaking. There, exposed to sun and storm, he remained. Each day, an eagle came. Not an ordinary bird, but a creature born of punishment and prophecy. It tore into his side and feasted upon his liver, seat of life and regeneration. Each night, the wound healed. Each morning, the pain returned. He endured. Centuries passed. Mountains rose and crumbled. Cities formed, fell, and reformed. Still, Prometheus endured. He did not beg. He did not curse. He waited. For he carried a secret. One that Zeus feared above all. Prometheus knew the name of the woman who would bear the child destined to overthrow the king of the gods. That knowledge shielded him, for Zeus could not destroy what might one day be needed. And so the Titan remained, punished, but undefeated. Mortals lit their fires. They cooked, wrote, sang, and mourned. They lived in a world now filled with both pain and possibility. They told stories, and among the first was this: of the Titan who gave them fire, of the gods who feared their rise, and of the hope that remained, even when the jar lay empty. Part 6. The 5 Ages of Man. In the stillness that followed the fall of the Titans and the rise of Olympus, the world entered a slower rhythm. Fire now glowed in hearths built by mortal hands. Songs rose softly through mountain valleys. Clay jars cooled beside shaded streams. The earth, once young and silent, had begun to hum with quiet human life. But time, as always, was shifting beneath the surface. The gods stood watchful. Mortals had received the gift of fire. They had carved homes from wilderness, planted seeds in open fields, and looked up at the stars with wide, questioning eyes. But theirs was not a single, unchanging time. Their journey would unfold in seasons. There would be a dawn of gold, a morning of silver, a midday of bronze, a brief and noble afternoon, and finally, an iron twilight. This was not reward or punishment. It was the natural passage of human time. And so the old poets spoke of 5 great ages. They were not clean divisions, nor sharp boundaries. Each age drifted into the next, like sunlight fading into shadow. But for those who listened closely, the shape of the story could be heard, soft and slow, like the tide rolling in at the edge of memory. The first was the Golden Age. In this earliest time, before Zeus raised his thunderbolt and before men knew pain, the world moved gently. Cronus ruled not by fear but by harmony. The soil was generous, spilling forth harvest without toil. Trees bent low with fruit. Rivers shimmered with fish. The wind was warm, the skies calm. Men lived without sorrow or sickness. There were no wars. No laws were needed, because no hearts held cruelty. They lived long lives, not in fear, but in ease. And when their time ended, they did not suffer or vanish. They passed quietly into sleep beneath open skies. Their spirits remained near, becoming silent guardians of the earth. They whispered through trees. They stirred the grass. They walked unseen beside those who came after. The Golden Age left no ruins behind. No swords. No statues. Only stories. And the memory of a time when kindness needed no rule, and peace was not a dream, but a way of life. When that age faded, another followed. The Silver Age came next. It was a colder season, full of new light but less warmth. Zeus had now claimed the heavens. The world was no longer untouched by divine rule. Men of the Silver Age were beautiful, but prideful. They lived for many years as children, never aging, never learning, sheltered in their homes. But when adulthood finally came, it came all at once, and brought with it defiance. They ignored the gods. They scorned the old ways. They forgot the meaning of gratitude. Rain no longer came freely. Crops began to wither without effort. Work was now required to survive. Slowly, reverence faded. Temples stood empty. Sacrifices went unoffered. Zeus, displeased, turned his face away. The men of this age lived shorter lives than those before. When they died, their spirits did not linger with kindness. They became cold and voiceless, wandering without purpose. The Silver Age did not end in fire. It faded into itself, dim, stubborn, and restless. But in time, something harder took its place. The Bronze Age arrived like a storm. In this time, men were forged not of memory or peace, but of war. Born from ash and cloud, they were stronger, faster, louder. Their hands shaped weapons. Their hearts burned with fury. They built cities with high walls. They trained for battle. They lived to conquer. Kindness was seen as weakness. The sword spoke louder than prayer. Honor was found not in wisdom, but in victory. Their homes were strongholds. Their songs were cries of defiance. The gods, once guides, became trophies. Strength was worshipped above all else. This age invented more than bronze tools. It crafted ambition. It molded desire. It celebrated the clash of armies more than the hush of peace. But with all their power, they burned too brightly. Their wars consumed them. Their pride shattered what they built. Their lives ended not with reverence, but with ruin. They left behind scorched fields, broken weapons, and echoes. Nothing of them remained but legend and silence. Then, unexpectedly, came a gentler time. The Age of Heroes. It was shorter than those before, but full of meaning. In these years walked men whose names would never be forgotten. Perseus, Heracles, Jason, Odysseus, Achilles. They were not peaceful, yet they were noble. They suffered greatly, but stood tall. They made mistakes, but learned. They crossed seas, defied fate, faced monsters, and challenged gods. Each hero bore the weight of destiny and the sting of loss. Though their time was brief, their actions reached far beyond their lifetimes. Unlike the men of bronze, these figures became more than memory. Their stories endured. Bards told their tales beside firelight. Statues bore their faces. Stars carried their names. They were mortal, yet they left behind something immortal. In them, the world saw the shape of courage, of sacrifice, of sorrow made meaningful. The age of heroes was not perfect, but it was beloved. And when it passed, the world grew colder once again. The Iron Age began not with thunder, but with tired breath. This is the age we live in still. A time of burden. A time of struggle. Men work hard for little reward. They wake to hardship and sleep with worry. The fields demand more than they give. The seasons turn less kindly. Children are born into toil. Old age comes quickly. Truth is often silenced by power. Lies wear the robes of kings. The gods, though still watching, speak less clearly now. Their voices are distant. Their signs are faint. Kindness has become rare. Greed runs fast. Laughter is harder to find. But even in the iron shadows, something remains. Hope. It flickers in small places. In the warmth of friendship. In the courage of the gentle. In the quiet love shared between those who endure together. Temples may crumble. Stories may fade. But the fire Prometheus gave still burns. A single flame, passed from hand to hand, across time. And perhaps, just perhaps, a new age may one day come. Not golden, nor silver, nor bronze. But something else. Something wiser. Something earned. Until then, the 5 ages remain as a long breath of memory. Each one a step in the path of humankind. Each one teaching what came before. Not perfect. Not peaceful. But alive. And still unfolding. Even now, as the stars turn slowly overhead, the story continues. Quietly. One age into the next. As it always has. And as it always will. Part 7. Pandora's Daughters, the Rise of Women in the Myths. In the beginning, before sorrow had a name and before fire lit the first hearth, there were no women in the world of men. The first mortals, shaped by Prometheus, lived in a world unbalanced. They planted, they built, they dreamed, yet their lives moved through quiet repetition. It was not harmony they lived in, but incompleteness. The gods, watchful and wary after the theft of fire, understood this silence could not last. And so the gods fashioned her. Pandora. Not born, but formed. Crafted by divine hands with exquisite care. Hephaestus shaped her from clay. Athena taught her the skill of weaving. Aphrodite poured into her the glow of beauty. Hermes gifted her charm and the art of persuasion. From each deity came something, a thread, a scent, a spark, until she was whole. The final gift she received, silent and concealed, was curiosity. Zeus looked upon her with approval, though the purpose of her creation was veiled. She was meant as both marvel and warning. When Pandora came to the mortal world, she carried with her a sealed jar. What lay inside had been hidden even from her. She was told only that it must never be opened. But curiosity is not a flaw. It is a mirror of the divine. It was inevitable that her hands, trembling and unsure, would lift the lid. What spilled out changed everything. Grief slipped into the soil. Pain crept into the joints of the old. Hunger circled children's beds. Envy slithered into hearts. Death, once unknown, began to visit the living. The jar contained every sorrow the gods had once locked away. By the time Pandora closed it again, the world had shifted. All that remained inside was one small thing, soft and flickering. Hope. Though much had been released, hope stayed. And so began the age of mortal complexity, and with it, the rise of the women who would follow her. Pandora was not an ending. She was a beginning, an origin not of punishment, but of change. Her daughters, whether born of blood or memory, would go on to shape myth not from the edges, but from the very heart of it. Among these daughters was Helen. Her beauty was spoken of long before her voice was ever heard. She was born of Leda and Zeus, a union shaped through divine disguise, and emerged from an egg alongside her sister Clytemnestra and her brothers Castor and Pollux. Half divine, radiant, and fated for greatness, Helen grew under the eyes of kings and suitors from across the known world. Her stepfather, Tyndareus, knowing her allure could ignite conflict, made her suitors swear an oath that whichever man won her hand, all others would defend the marriage, no matter the cost. She became the Queen of Sparta, married to Menelaus. But it was not the marriage that the world would remember. When Paris of Troy arrived and carried her across the sea, whether by seduction, by love, or by force, the oath was called upon. 1,000 ships set sail. The greatest war of myth began. God chose seed. Empires trembled. And Helen, silent in many of the old poems, became the face that launched it all. Some would blame her. Others would defend her. But either way, her voice remained part of every whispered story that followed. Whether victim or willing participant, she was no longer invisible. She stood at the center of an age that changed the course of legend itself. If Helen was the spark of a war, Medea was its fire. She was born a princess in Colchis, raised among spells and sacred groves, a granddaughter of the sun god Helios. Magic coursed through her thoughts like blood through veins. When Jason arrived to claim the Golden Fleece, it was Medea who changed the course of his journey. The gods had stirred her heart, binding it to Jason's fate. She betrayed her father. She betrayed her kingdom. She killed her own brother to delay pursuit. And she fled with Jason across the sea. But in the new world, her magic was feared. Her loyalty became inconvenient. Jason, seeking favor and security, turned away from her and toward another woman. Medea, wounded not only by betrayal but by abandonment, did not collapse. She became something the world had not seen before. She turned her rage into thunder. She killed the princess he was to marry. And then, in an act of unimaginable pain, she took the lives of her own sons. She did not do it in madness, but in fury sharpened by clarity. She left Jason broken and vanished into myth, drawn away by a chariot gifted by her divine grandfather. Medea was never forgiven, nor was she forgotten. Her tale is not one of comfort, but of consequence. Not all women of myth answered betrayal with fire. Some resisted with silence, with patience, with a strength that wore no armor. Penelope, wife of Odysseus, remained in Ithaca for 20 years while her husband wandered through war and sea. She raised their son alone. She ruled in his absence. She endured the constant pressure of men who assumed she had been abandoned. To delay them, she promised to choose a new husband once she finished weaving a burial shroud. Each night, by the light of a small fire, she undid the work she had done by day. For 3 years, this quiet rebellion held them at bay. When Odysseus finally returned, disguised and cautious, Penelope did not fall into his arms. She tested him. She spoke in riddles. Only when he described their bed, carved from the trunk of a rooted tree, did she know him to be real. Her story was not loud. It was not soaked in blood or fire. Yet her legacy is one of the deepest strength. In her, myth found a voice for loyalty that does not weaken, an intelligence that does not shout. Some daughters of Pandora were born into palaces. Others rose from wildness. Atalanta was one such soul. Left to die on a mountain as an infant, she was suckled by a bear and raised by hunters. Her limbs knew how to climb before they learned to kneel. As she grew, she ran faster than any man. She refused to marry unless a suitor could outrun her, and if they lost, they would lose their lives as well. Many tried. None succeeded. Then came Hippomenes, clever but not fast. With the help of Aphrodite, he carried 3 golden apples. During the race, he tossed them one by one, slowing Atalanta just enough to win. They married, but forgot to show reverence to the gods. In their passion, they defiled a sacred space. For this, they were turned into lions, forever yoked together, unable to speak, yet never apart. Atalanta's tale, though it ends in silence, speaks of independence. She lived by her own code. She hunted beside men. She set the terms of her life and paid the price for breaking them. There were others too, who chose the shadows, who ruled not with grace but with wrath. Clytemnestra, sister of Helen, queen of Mycenae, mother and executioner. Her husband Agamemnon left for Troy, and before setting sail, he sacrificed their daughter Iphigenia to appease the gods. 10 years passed. Clytemnestra waited. When Agamemnon returned, she greeted him not with joy, but with a blade. She killed him while he bathed, spilling blood to answer blood. She ruled in his absence. She claimed justice where others saw revenge. Her own son, Orestes, would one day kill her in turn, urged on by the gods and the weight of cursed prophecy. Yet even then, her name lingered not as a villain's, but as a force. A queen who refused to bow to grief without response. And there was Ariadne, who helped Theseus escape the labyrinth. She gave him the thread that led him back through the maze. She led him away from sacrifice, from darkness. In return, he left her behind on the island of Naxos. Alone and betrayed, she did not fall into despair. Dionysus found her there and took her as his queen. In the stars, he placed her crown. Her story does not end in sorrow, but in rising. Each of these women, whether remembered in rage or grace, holds a mirror to the world that shaped them. Pandora was not the only one gifted with curiosity, strength, or danger. Her daughters inherited those gifts in full. Some used them to challenge gods. Others used them to protect children, to outwit enemies, to wait without crumbling. They were not perfect. Their stories are not always easy, but they are lasting. The myths did not forget them. Nor should we. Even now, as the sky grows darker and our eyes grow heavy, these voices linger. They rise in dreams. They echo in the corners of old songs. They walk beside us, not with crowns or wings, but with quiet steps, unshaken and unforgotten. Their presence reminds us that myth was never just about gods or monsters. It was always about people. And among them, the daughters of Pandora walked boldly. Still seen, still heard, still rising. Part 8. Fire in their veins, the rise of mortal heroes. In the space between gods and men, there walked a different kind of figure. Not immortal, yet more than common. Not divine, but touched by divinity. These were the heroes of the old stories, men and women born of the earth and the heavens, their blood running thick with fire and fate. They stood at the crossroads of myth and mortality, stepping into danger with trembling hearts and steady hands. The gods, though distant, still watched. Sometimes they whispered guidance. Other times they stirred conflict for their own amusement. And in rare moments, they reached across the divide and left their mark upon a mortal womb. From these strange unions came children unlike any others. Stronger, bolder, doomed to be remembered. These mortal heroes did not walk in peace. Their lives were shaped by storms, storms both outside and within. They fought monsters, defied kings, crossed oceans, and entered the underworld. They were flawed, often reckless, sometimes cruel, but always burning with purpose. Among them, the first to carve his name into the roots of legend was Perseus. His story began not in battle, but in fear. Long before he held a sword, before he even took his first breath, His fate was sealed by a prophecy. King Acrisius of Argos, fearing the gods more than he feared time, received a warning from the oracle. His daughter, Danae, would bear a son who would one day bring about his death. Terrified, he sought to outwit fate, as kings often did. He locked Danae in a tower of bronze, deep beneath the earth, sealed away from the world. But the gods are not confined by walls or bars. Zeus came to her not as a man, but as golden light, slipping through the cracks, warm and shining. From this divine encounter, Perseus was conceived. When Acrisius discovered the child, he dared not kill him directly. The blood of Zeus was not easily spilled. Instead, he placed Danae and the infant into a wooden chest and cast them into the sea, trusting the waves to do what his hands would not. Yet the sea, often cruel, showed mercy. The chest floated to the island of Seriphos, where a fisherman named Dictys pulled them from the surf and gave them shelter. Perseus grew beneath the sun, far from thrones and towers. He learned humility before heroism. But peace rarely lasts in stories touched by fate. The king of Seriphos, Polydectes, desired Danae for himself. Perseus, now a young man, stood in his way. The king, unwilling to strike directly, challenged him instead. He demanded a gift unlike any other, the head of Medusa. None had ever returned from such a quest. Medusa, once a woman, had been cursed into monstrosity. Her hair writhed with living snakes. Her gaze turned flesh to stone. She lived at the edge of the world, beyond oceans and memory. Perseus accepted. He had no armor, no map, no experience. But he had courage. And soon, he had help. Athena, who bore a quiet grudge against Medusa, lent him a polished shield, not for defense, but for reflection. Hermes offered winged sandals and a curved blade. From the Grey Sisters, Perseus learned the way. From nymphs, he received a magical bag and a helm of darkness. He traveled far, guided by starlight and silence. At the edge of the world, he found the Gorgons sleeping. Using the mirrored shield, he crept close and struck swiftly, severing Medusa's head without ever meeting her eyes. From her blood, two beings emerged, Pegasus, the winged horse, and Chryse, a warrior of gold. With the head hidden safely in the bag, Perseus fled, unseen beneath the helm. On his return journey, he found a woman chained to a rock. Her name was Andromeda. She had been offered to a sea monster as a sacrifice. Perseus, moved by her calm, her stillness, and the cruelty of her fate, turned the monster to stone and carried her away. He returned to Seriphos not as a boy, but as a legend. When Polydectes mocked him, Perseus revealed the head of Medusa. The king and his court turned to stone where they stood. Dictys became king. Danae found peace. Later, Perseus would return to Argos. Acrisius, upon hearing of his grandson's arrival, fled the city in fear. But fate does not forget. At the funeral games of a distant land, Perseus threw a discus. It sailed wide and struck an old man in the crowd. Acrisius had tried to run from the prophecy. In doing so, he ran straight into it. Perseus wept. But prophecy cannot be undone. Another name burned brightly in the tapestry of mortal courage: Heracles, son of Zeus and Alcmena, a man who carried the weight of gods and the rage of his own sorrow. His birth was shaped by deception. Zeus, desiring Alcmena, disguised himself as her husband. From this union came a child too large for a single life. Even as a baby, Heracles showed strength beyond reason. Hera, enraged by Zeus's betrayal, sent serpents into his cradle. The infant crushed them with his bare hands. But Hera's hatred did not end there. As he grew, she cursed him with madness. In a fog of confusion, Heracles struck down his wife and children. When his mind cleared, he saw only blood and silence. He sought penance. The oracle of Delphi, speaking through the god Apollo, sent him to serve King Eurystheus. There, Heracles was tasked with 12 labors, each more impossible than the last. He slew the Nemean lion, its golden hide untouched by blades. He wrestled the Hydra, its heads multiplying with every strike, until he learned to cauterize the wounds. He captured the golden hind, chased the Erymanthian boar, and cleaned the Augean stables in a single day by turning rivers through their filth. He drove away man-eating birds, tamed the Cretan bull, and stole the mares of Diams. He took the girdle of the Amazon queen, stole the cattle of Geryon, and fetched the golden apples of the Hesperides by tricking Atlas himself. His final labor brought him to the Underworld. There, he faced Cerberus, the three-headed hound of Hades. Heracles asked for permission, and with strength alone, led the beast to the surface, then returned it unharmed. It was not just a feat of muscle. It was a journey into death and back. Yet even after his labors, peace eluded him. Poison would find him in the end, a tunic laced with the blood of a dying centaur. As it burned through his skin, Heracles built his own funeral pyre. No mortal dared to light it. Only Philoctetes, a humble friend, stepped forward. For that act, he received the hero's bow. As the flames rose, the gods intervened. Zeus lifted Heracles into the sky. There, among the stars, he became divine. But not every hero was born of divine blood. Some rose from sorrow, from pain, from choices made not in glory, but in defiance. Theseus, Prince of Athens, grew up far from the city he was destined to lead. His father, Zeus, left behind a sword and sandals beneath a great stone. When the boy could lift it, he would know his path. Theseus, upon reaching manhood, took the harder road to Athens, walking the land rather than sailing safely. Along the way, he defeated robbers, monsters, and men who preyed on the weak. He arrived not as a prince, but as a protector. In time, he volunteered to face the Minotaur, a beast hidden within the Labyrinth. Each year, Athens sent tributes to be devoured. Theseus vowed to end it. With the help of Ariadne, who gave him thread to trace his path, he entered the maze, killed the monster, and led the others to freedom. He left Ariadne behind. Why, no one knows for sure. But upon returning home, he forgot to raise the white sails he had promised his father. Seeing black on the horizon, Zeus leapt into the sea in grief. It would forever bear his name, the Aegean. Theseus later unified the region of Attica, founding the city of Athens as more than a place, as an idea. A city of law. A city of thought. A city shaped not by swords alone, but by ideals. And then there was Jason. His story began with loss. His father's throne was stolen. He was hidden away and raised in secret. When he returned, the usurper, Peleus, sent him on a quest designed to kill him, retrieved the golden fleece from the distant land of Colchis. Jason built a ship, the Argo, and gathered heroes from across Greece. They faced harpies, clashing rocks, and endless trials. In Colchis, he met Medea. She helped him succeed. She betrayed her own to be by his side. And when he returned, he turned away from her. Their love ended in blood. Jason died alone, beneath the rotting hull of the Argo. Each of these heroes burned brightly. Some were born to gods. Others forged their names from ash. But all of them walked the edge of destiny, their lives echoing long after their deaths. In them, the ancient world saw what mortals could become. Not perfect, not eternal, but unforgettable. They faced fear. They stumbled. They bled. They stood again. And in the quiet moments before sleep, when the world grows still and memory stirs, their stories return, not to boast, but to remind that even in the shadows of gods, mortal hearts can blaze. Part 9. The Trials of Love and Loyalty. Love in the world of the gods was rarely gentle. It did not come quietly, nor did it often stay. It burned, struck, twisted, and transformed. It reached across oceans, pierced through time, and settled deep within the hearts of mortals and immortals alike. In Greek mythology, love was a force of nature, not a comfort, but a current that could carry you to safety or pull you beneath the waves without warning. And where love went, loyalty followed, sometimes as a guiding light, sometimes as a weight too heavy to bear. The old stories did not separate the two. They wove them together, tangled and trembling, showing again and again that to love in such a world was to suffer, to hope, and to risk everything. The gods themselves were not immune to these tides. They loved as fiercely as they ruled, and in doing so, they left behind stories etched in heartbreak and devotion. One of the most enduring tales of tragic love belongs to Orpheus and Eurydice. Orpheus, son of the muse Calliope and immortal king, was given a gift unlike any other. His music could tame wild beasts, soften stone, and still the winds. His lyre sang with the voice of the divine, and when he met Eurydice, a nymph of quiet grace, it was said that even the trees leaned closer to hear their laughter. Their love was immediate, deep, and whole. But the world, ever shifting, rarely allowed such things to endure. On their wedding day, Eurydice walked through a field and was bitten by a serpent. Death came swiftly, and her body was laid beneath the soil while Orpheus stood above, stunned by silence. He could not accept it. He descended into the underworld, guided by grief and melody. No mortal had ever returned from that place, but Orpheus did not beg. He sang. Before the gates of Hades, he played his lyre. The rivers stopped flowing. The Furies wept. Even the great king and queen of the dead, Hades and Persephone, were moved by the sorrow in his voice. They granted him a chance. Eurydice would follow him back to the world of the living, but he must not look back at her until both had reached the light. Orpheus agreed, and so they walked, step by step, through shadows and stone. He could hear her behind him, the soft echo of her feet, the breath he thought he'd lost. But doubt, like a thorn, pressed into his heart. What if she wasn't there? What if Hades had changed his mind? What if he had already lost her forever? As the mouth of the cave opened before him and sunlight brushed his face, Orpheus turned. Eurydice, still in shadow, reached toward him and vanished. She did not speak. She did not cry. She simply faded into the dark once more, pulled away not by cruelty, but by the condition he could not keep. Orpheus returned to the surface alone. He never loved again. His music grew quieter, softer, filled with the ache of what could not be undone. Another tale of tested love belongs to Pygmalion, a sculptor of great skill who lived alone, untouched by desire. He saw flaws in the hearts of others and believed love to be a weakness. Instead of courting companionship, he turned to his craft. With hands shaped by patience, he carved a statue from ivory. Day by day, he refined her form, the curve of her shoulder, the tilt of her head, the grace of her hands. In her, he placed not only his talent, but his longing. He gave her no name, for none seemed worthy. And as the seasons passed, his admiration grew into something deeper. He spoke to her, dressed her, kissed her cold lips. He fell in love with what he had made. At the festival of Aphrodite, goddess of love and beauty, Pygmalion offered prayers not for wealth or favor, but for a bride who would be like his creation. The goddess, amused and moved in equal measure, listened. When he returned home, he kissed the statue once more, and her lips warmed. Her skin softened. She blinked, breathed, and took his hand. Aphrodite had breathed life into love itself. The statue, now a woman, became his wife, and in some tellings, her name was Galatea. Theirs was a rare ending, one without cruelty, where devotion was returned, and a lonely man found warmth in the arms of his own longing. Not all stories ended in joy. Echo, a nymph of the forests, was cursed by Hera to speak only the words spoken to her. Once full of laughter and stories, she became a shadow of herself, trapped in repetition. When she met Narcissus, a beautiful young man cursed to love only himself, she was struck silent with awe. She followed him, listened to his voice, but could say nothing more than what he already said. Narcissus, seeing only himself, rejected her. Echo withered in the hills, her body fading until nothing remained but her voice. It still lingers, repeating words, carried by wind and stone. Narcissus, in turn, stared into a still pool, fell in love with his reflection, and could not look away. He too faded, becoming a flower that bears his name. Their tale warns of love turned inward, of voices ignored, of beauty without depth. And yet, it lingers, not as cruelty, but as reminder. Even among the gods, love and loyalty walked a narrow edge. Hera, queen of Olympus, goddess of marriage and commitment, loved Zeus not because he was kind, but because he was hers. His betrayals were many. His conquests stretched across the heavens and earth. Yet Hera remained. She punished those he loved. She stirred storms, crafted vengeance, and carried the weight of his whims with silent fury. Her loyalty was not passive. It was jagged, angry, and enduring. Hers was not the love of warmth, but of promise, of oaths spoken before time had names. In contrast, there was Eros and Psyche, the god of desire and the mortal girl whose soul drew him closer than he had ever known. Psyche, born with beauty that rivaled Aphrodite, drew the goddess's envy. She was cursed to love a monster, but instead, Eros came to her in secret. He loved her in darkness, visiting only by night. He asked that she never look upon his face. For a time, she obeyed. But whispers from her sisters planted doubt. One night, Psyche lit a lamp and gazed upon the sleeping god beside her. A drop of oil fell. He awoke and vanished. Her journey to find him took her through impossible tasks, each one set by Aphrodite herself. Sorting seeds in a single night, fetching golden wool from deadly rams, bringing water from the river of the dead, even descending into the underworld for a box of beauty. Through pain, humility, and courage, Psyche endured. And at last, the gods relented. Eros returned to her. She was granted immortality. Their union was sealed in Olympus, a joining of desire and soul. Their daughter, Voluptas, would become the goddess of pleasure. But theirs was not a tale of ease. It was shaped by patience, by longing, and by the slow fire of understanding. Time after time, the myths returned to these themes. Not because love was rare, but because love was dangerous. To love, in those old stories, was to open the door to loss, to risk betrayal, to test the gods. Yet again and again, mortals chose love anyway. They waited by the sea. They searched through darkness. They sang to stone. They carved life from ivory. Even when it failed, even when it hurt, they reached. The trials of love and loyalty in Greek mythology are not lessons wrapped in happy endings. They are reflections of the deepest human truths. That to care is to risk. That devotion often walks beside despair. That longing may outlive the life that once carried it. And yet, in the final breath of every story, something remains. A song, a whisper, a name spoken through generations. Orpheus still sings. Pygmalion still kneels. Psyche still searches. And we, listening centuries later, still feel the heat in their hearts. Love does not fade. Loyalty does not vanish. They linger like firelight, warm, flickering, and eternal. Even now, as night gathers and the world grows quiet, their stories remain, waiting, remembered, alive. Part 10. The Labyrinth of Fate, Curses, Prophecies, and the Unseen Hand. In the world of Greek mythology, fate was not merely a word spoken in passing or a shadow lurking behind choice. It was a force as old as the stars, older even than the gods who shaped the heavens and ruled the sea. Fate was not something that could be bargained with. It did not listen to prayers, nor did it bend for beauty, strength, or wisdom. It moved through every story like an invisible current beneath a calm surface, always there, always pulling. Mortals feared it. Gods respected it. And even those who claimed mastery over thunder and time stepped carefully around its silent path. In myth, curses and prophecies were the threads that wove destiny together. They were not accidents. They were signposts, warnings etched into the bones of the world. A single word from an oracle could seal a lifetime. A curse whispered in anger could echo through generations. And yet, again and again, the figures in these tales struggled against what had been foretold, trying to outpace what could not be outrun. Few stories speak of fate more clearly than that of Oedipus. He was born to a royal family in Thebes. His parents, King Laius and Queen Jocasta, were given a prophecy that their son would grow up to kill his father and marry his mother. Horrified, they tried to escape this future before it could begin. They ordered the infant to be left on a mountainside, his ankles bound so he could not crawl away. But as with many attempts to defy prophecy, their plan only ensured its fulfillment. A shepherd found the child and, moved by pity, delivered him to the king and queen of Corinth. They raised him as their own, never revealing the truth. Oedipus grew into a clever and passionate young man. When he learned of the prophecy, unaware it spoke not of his adoptive parents, but his birth parents, he fled Corinth to protect those he believed to be his mother and father. On the road to Thebes, he encountered a man at a crossroads. They argued. In a flash of anger, Oedipus killed the stranger, never knowing he had just taken the life of his real father. When he arrived in Thebes, he found the city cursed. A monstrous creature called the Sphinx posed a riddle at the city's gates, devouring all who failed to answer. Oedipus stood before the beast and listened to its challenge. What walks on 4 legs in the morning, 2 legs at noon, and 3 legs in the evening? His answer was simple, but wise. Man. As a child, he crawls on all 4s. As an adult, he walks upright. And in old age, he leans on a staff. The Sphinx collapsed in silence. Thebes was free. In gratitude, the people crowned him king and gave him the widowed queen's hand in marriage. Years passed. Children were born. The kingdom thrived. But fate had not forgotten. A plague came to the city, and the truth began to surface like a slow tide. Oedipus, searching for the cause of the sickness, uncovered the truth layer by layer. The man he had killed was Laius, his father. The woman he had married was Jocasta, his mother. In horror, she took her life. Oedipus blinded himself and left the city, guided only by his daughter's hand. His tale is not one of evil, but of inevitability. He tried to do what was right. He made every choice with care. Yet fate, winding and cruel, brought him exactly where it said he would go. Another who walked in the shadow of prophecy was Achilles. His mother, Thetis, knew from the moment of his birth that he would live a short life. Glorious, yes, but brief. He would die young, at Troy, remembered forever but lost before his time. To protect him, she dipped his body in the river Styx, making him nearly invincible. But the heel by which she held him remained untouched, soft, and mortal. Achilles grew into a warrior unmatched. When the Greeks set sail for Troy, he was called upon. At first, he resisted. He hid among women, disguised in silence. But prophecy has no interest in costumes. Odysseus found him, revealed him, and drew him into the war. For years, Achilles fought brilliantly. He was swift, ruthless, and beautiful in battle. But his heart was full of pride. When Agamemnon, the leader of the Greek forces, insulted him by taking a woman he claimed as his own, Achilles withdrew. Without him, the Greeks began to fall. It was the death of his closest companion, Patroclus, that pulled him back. Patroclus had entered battle wearing Achilles' armor, hoping to inspire the troops. He was killed by Hector, Prince of Troy. Achilles returned with fury. He slaughtered Hector and dragged his body behind his chariot. But no vengeance could bring back what was lost. Soon after, a poisoned arrow, guided by Apollo, struck Achilles in the heel, the only place he could be wounded. He died exactly as his mother had feared. Glorious. Short-lived. Remembered. His story was drawn not in ink, but in fire. Sometimes, fate did not arrive in words, but in a look. Paris, the Prince of Troy, was asked to judge which of three goddesses was the fairest, Hera, Athena, or Aphrodite. Each offered him a gift: power, wisdom, love. He chose love. Aphrodite promised him the most beautiful woman in the world, Helen, already married to the king of Sparta. When Paris took her, he unleashed a war that would burn for a decade. He did not see prophecy carved in stone. He did not hear a god whisper doom. He only saw beauty and reached for it. The curse that followed was one of fire and ruin. At times, fate passed down through blood. The house of Atreus was soaked in curses that reached across generations. Tantalus, the ancestor of this line, offended the gods by serving his own son as a meal at their table. The gods, horrified, restored the child, Pelops, and cursed the family forever. Pelops' sons, Atreus and Thyestes, feuded for the throne. Atreus killed Thyestes' children and fed them to their father. This act echoed through time. Agamemnon, son of Atreus, inherited the curse. He sacrificed his daughter, Iphigenia, to gain favorable winds for the journey to Troy. When he returned, his wife, Clytemnestra, murdered him in his bath. Their son, Orestes, avenged his father by killing his mother. The Furies, ancient spirits of vengeance, pursued him across the earth. Only the intervention of Athena brought peace, transforming vengeance into justice. But the stain of prophecy, of inherited sin, remained. The labyrinth of fate in these myths is not a single road. It wins. It doubles back. It punishes the innocent. It offers glimpses of escape, only to close the door at the last moment. Yet, through all of this, the stories remind us of something quieter. While fate may guide the path, choice still shapes the walk. Oedipus chose to search for the truth. Achilles chose to return to battle. Psyche chose to climb into the underworld. Penelope chose to wait. In these moments, free will pressed gently against the weight of prophecy. And though the gods may have shaped the stars, it was the people who lit fires beneath them. The myths of Greece do not promise happy endings. They do not offer peace without cost. But they do offer honesty. About the complexity of being human. About the silence that follows a warning. About the voice that speaks, even when the future has been written. Fate may not be moved. But within its narrow corridors, there is still space for courage. For love. For dignity. Even now, as you listen in the quiet, with the world falling slowly into sleep, the labyrinth remains. Its walls are high. Its turns are many. But the path is yours. Step by step. Light by light. You are not lost. You are simply walking. Part 11. The World Beneath. Journeys into the Underworld. There is a place beneath the earth where sunlight never reaches. A realm where time does not pass in days, and where the seasons do not turn. This is the Underworld, not a place of fire or brimstone, but of stillness, shadow, and silence. It lies beneath the living world, behind the curtain of life's final breath, and within it, every soul eventually arrives. The Greeks did not imagine death as a punishment, nor did they believe in a single reward or a single hell. The world beneath was layered, mysterious, shaped by the life one lived and the weight one carried. Some found peace. Others wandered in restlessness. But all, no matter their station, walked the same path into shadow. To journey to the underworld was not simply to die. It was to pass through a boundary, to walk into the deepest truths. Truths hidden from the living and guarded by ancient laws that not even gods dared to break. Those who traveled there did not always go in death. Some went in life, carried by love, vengeance, duty, or fate. And through their steps, the veil was lifted, revealing a world as rich and detailed as the earth above. At the entrance to the underworld, one would find the river Styx. Its waters were dark and slow, winding through the boundary between life and death like a black ribbon sewn through the seams of the earth. This river was sacred. Gods swore their most binding oaths upon it. To break a vow made by the Styx was to invite a sleep lasting 100 years, even for immortals. Along its banks waited Charon, the ferryman. Old and weathered, his eyes deep and indifferent, he rowed the dead across in his creaking boat. But passage was not free. Each soul was expected to pay with a coin, placed beneath the tongue at burial. Those who lacked the fare were left to wander the shore for eternity, their voices thin as mist. The journey across the Styx was not long, but it was unforgettable. The air grew colder. Light dimmed into something heavy, and the silence thickened until even thought felt distant. On the far side of the river stood the gates, immense and silent, guarded by Cerberus, the three-headed hound. Each of his faces watched a different direction. One forward, one back, one inward. He did not speak, but his presence alone made clear the truth. Those who entered did not leave. Not unless the gods willed it. Yet there were those who returned. Orpheus descended for love. Heracles for duty. Odysseus for knowledge. Each saw the world below not as myth, but as stone and river, echo and shadow. Beyond the gates, the underworld opened like a vast, forgotten city. It was not empty. It did not burn. It was filled with layers, regions marked by memory, judgment, and silence. First came the fields of asphodel. Here wandered the souls of ordinary men and women. Neither wicked nor virtuous, they moved slowly through grey meadows. Flowers bloomed without scent. Wind stirred without warmth. This was the resting place of those who had lived quietly. There was no suffering here, but no joy either. It was peace, stripped of color. For those who had committed great crimes, betrayal, murder, or sacrilege, a deeper region waited. Tartarus. It was not hell in the modern sense. It was deeper than punishment. A place where ancient enemies of the gods, the titans, the worst monsters, and the damned, were bound in chains forged by the hundred-handed ones. The air here was heavy and close. Light did not shine, even in dreams. Suffering came not from flame, but from timelessness. Time stretched without end, and within it, memory became torment. Yet not all the dead suffered. For heroes, for those whose deeds echoed through history and whose sacrifices were pure, there was the Elysian fields. Wide and green, touched by golden light, they were said to lie at the edge of the world, where gentle breezes carried the scent of blooming trees and where music floated on the wind. Here the great rested, poets, warriors, lovers, their days peaceful, their stories remembered. In this place, laughter was soft and real. Reunion was possible. Some few were said to be reborn. If a soul passed through Elysium 3 times and chose to return each time with a heart full of virtue, it would escape the cycle and ascend beyond even the gods' reach. Presiding over all this was Hades. Often misunderstood, he was not a god of evil or cruelty. He was stern, but not unkind. Just, but not vengeful. He ruled the dead, not to punish them, but to keep balance between the worlds. He sat upon a throne of obsidian and bone, crowned not with fire, but with silence. His gaze was steady, and his word was law. The dead did not fear him. They obeyed. Beside him stood Persephone, queen of the underworld. Her story began in sunlight. Daughter of Demeter, goddess of the harvest, Persephone once walked through fields of wildflowers, untouched by sorrow. One day, as she bent to pluck a bloom, the ground opened beneath her. Hades rose from the depths and carried her away. Demeter, stricken with grief, searched the world. Her sorrow turned the earth cold. Crops withered. Snow fell. The world grew hungry. At last, Zeus intervened. A compromise was struck. Persephone would spend part of the year with her mother, and part in the underworld. During the months above, the world would bloom. When she returned below, winter would follow. Thus the seasons were born, not from weather, but from the rhythm of love and absence. Over time, Persephone's role changed. She did not remain a stolen girl. She became queen, equal in presence, powerful in her own right. The dead respected her. The living feared her. She walked among the shades with grace and strength. She was both the flower and the shadow. To descend into the underworld was never simple. Odysseus, seeking knowledge, came not to die, but to learn. He journeyed to the realm of Hades while still breathing, guided by a desire to hear prophecy from the dead. There, on the edge of the world, he performed the rites, digging a pit, pouring libations of honey, wine, and blood. The shades rose. They gathered near, drawn to the scent of life. Among them was Tiresias, the blind seer, who spoke of storms and struggles yet to come. Odysseus also met his mother. She had died in his absence. They could not touch, could not hold, but they spoke, and in that moment, the distance between life and death softened. Even Heracles walked the underworld while living. As one of his 12 labors, he was tasked with retrieving Cerberus, not to harm, but to bring to the surface. Hades allowed it, so long as no weapons were used. Heracles descended, wrapped the beast in his arms, and returned him, if only briefly, to the world above. In doing so, he proved that even death could be approached with strength and honor. For Aeneas, a hero of later tales, the descent came through duty. He sought the spirit of his father and entered the realm of the dead guided by the Sibyl. He saw the punishments of the damned, the rewards of the just, and the river Lethe, from which souls drank to forget their past lives. In these stories, the underworld was more than an ending. It was a mirror. It showed the truth behind every choice, every promise, every silence. Those who returned were never the same. They carried its weight in their eyes. They spoke more softly. They listened more carefully. To enter the world beneath was not to seek death, but to understand it. To see it not as punishment, but as part of the story, one more chapter in the great, winding book of life. The Greeks did not fear the underworld as a place of torment alone. They feared forgetting. They feared silence. They feared not being remembered. And so they told these stories. Of those who crossed into shadow. Of those who stood before the throne of Hades. Of those who saw the flicker of their own ending and returned to tell others what they had seen. They spoke of coins beneath the tongue. Of rivers that could not be crossed twice. Of queens with pomegranate seeds on their lips. And gods who ruled without cruelty. Even now, when the wind is still and the night is deep, some say you can feel it, the quiet pull of the underworld, not as terror, but as reminder. That we walk with the dead beside us. That memory does not fade. That love, even lost, lingers in places the living cannot see. The world beneath is not the end. It is the silence after the final word, the breath before the next dream begins. And as your thoughts settle and the shadows lengthen, know that the journey continues, not into darkness, but into depth, a place where stories sleep, waiting to rise once more. Part 12. Beneath the Temple Vault, Secrets of the Sacred and the Divine. Above the cities and forests of ancient Greece, temples stood like silent witnesses to the world below. Crafted from marble, wrapped in shadow and sunlight, they were more than buildings. Each column, each carved relief, whispered of gods unseen. These were not mere houses of worship. They were bridges, between man and immortal, between earth and sky, between the known and the unknowable. To step inside a temple in the ancient world was to cross a threshold, not just of stone, but of spirit. You left behind the marketplace and the sound of sandals scraping dirt. Within those sacred walls, time seemed to slow. Even the air felt different, cooler, heavier, filled with unseen weight. These places were designed to humble, to remind each visitor that the divine was not far removed from the lives they lived. It breathed behind veils and waited beneath the floor. Each temple belonged to a god or goddess, and each structure reflected the power it honored. The Parthenon, in Athens, was a tribute to Athena, wise, watchful, and strong. It towered over the city as she did over its people. Within it stood a great statue of the goddess herself, gold and ivory gleaming in the torchlight. She wore her armor proudly, her shield carved with images of battle and protection. Yet even as she stood frozen in form, those who entered felt her presence stir. Elsewhere, temples to Apollo bathed in sunlight. These sanctuaries welcomed music, poetry, and prophecy. The most famous stood at Delphi, where the oracle whispered the words of the god from deep within the temple's chest. There, in a room half lit by flickering lamps, the Pythia sat above a crack in the earth. Vapors rose, and her voice, distant and strange, answered questions with riddles that shaped empires and decided fates. Temples to Artemis, goddess of the hunt and the wild, rested near forests or springs. Simple and sacred, they mirrored her nature, quiet, observant, untamed. Here, animals were honored alongside humans. Offerings were made not in grandeur but in gratitude. People asked for safety, for strength, for children to grow strong. At Eleusis, a mystery unfolded each year, a ritual older than memory. It honored Demeter and her daughter Persephone, echoing the cycle of growth, loss, and return. Those who participated in the rites were sworn to secrecy. They drank, they walked in silence, and at the end, they emerged transformed. The Eleusinian mysteries promised something rare, a glimpse beyond death, a whisper of renewal, the comfort of something enduring. Not all temples were open to all eyes. Deep within many of them lay the Adyton, the most sacred chamber. Hidden behind doors, sometimes beneath the very floor, this was where the divine was said to dwell most clearly. Only the priests or priestesses could enter. Their role was not to command the gods, but to maintain balance, to tend the fire, to prepare the offerings, to keep the sacred calendar from unraveling. It was within these secret spaces that the sacred met the physical. Statues were washed and dressed as if alive. Rituals were performed with careful rhythm. Incense drifted through the air in coils, carrying prayers upward. Sacred stones, pieces of meteorite, or fragments of older temples were kept wrapped in cloth, believed to hold power older than any name. Outside, the people waited. They brought fruit, animals, coins, and songs. They knelt or danced, depending on the god. Some left offerings of honey, others left weapons taken in war. These acts were not bribes. They were acknowledgements, symbols of connection, reminders that humans were not alone in their struggle. Among the priests, there were those who knew more than others. They memorized the myths not as stories, but as codes. They studied the stars, the changing winds, the behavior of birds, the shape of smoke rising from a fire. From these signs, they read meaning. They watched eclipses, tracked seasons, and interpreted dreams. They guarded tablets etched with prayers, poems, and rituals, many of which no longer survive. But in their time, they held great weight. Not because they held magic, but because they reminded people how to live in rhythm with the sacred. Temples were also places of healing. In the sanctuaries of Asclepius, god of medicine, the sick came to sleep. They lay on mats of straw, surrounded by carved serpents and stone guardians. In dreams, they hoped the god would appear, touch their illness, and offer a cure. Priests interpreted these dreams by mourning. Sometimes herbs were offered, sometimes silence, and sometimes healing came not in body, but in acceptance. This practice, known as incubation, was as much spiritual as physical. It taught that rest could be a form of prayer, that sleep was not absence, but invitation. Sacred architecture reflected sacred thought. Columns rose not just to support, but to point upward, outward, inward. They reminded all who walked between them that they, too, stood between worlds. Beneath their feet, mosaic floors told stories of gods battling giants, of mortals defying fate, of love, loss, and light. Above, painted ceilings depicted stars and skies, bringing heaven closer. But perhaps the greatest mystery of these temples was not what they showed, but what they concealed. They held no sermons, no universal book to read from. Their rituals changed from city to city, from mountain shrine to island altar. What remained constant was the feeling, a hush in the chest, a sense of being watched, not in fear, but in presence. It was believed that gods could inhabit their statues, step into flame, ride the smoke of burning offerings. They did not require belief, only acknowledgement. Within these sacred walls, myths lived not as entertainment, but as instructions. They taught that mortals and immortals were part of the same world, divided by a veil that could be felt, if not seen. Sacrifice was not about blood. It was about exchange. You gave something, a fig, a song, a strand of hair, and in return, you asked for guidance. The gods did not always answer, but the silence itself could be meaningful. There were also household shrines, small and humble, tucked into corners of kitchens or beside doors. Here, Hestia was honored, goddess of the hearth, of warmth and home. A flame was kept burning. Meals were shared with her in quiet blessing. These moments were no less sacred than the great temples. In fact, they may have been more personal. Each home became a miniature temple, each act of kindness a ritual. And every day, in small ways, the sacred touched the ordinary. In the temples, sacred festivals unfolded across the year. Each god had their season. Bacchus, or Dionysus, was honored with song, wine, and ecstatic dance. His followers, draped in ivy and crowned with grapes, celebrated the loss of self, not to forget, but to dissolve the boundary between flesh and spirit. They called this frenzy ecstasis, to stand outside oneself, to feel the divine not above, but within. In these moments, they believed the gods walked among them. And perhaps they did. There were also darker rites. In caves and hidden groves, certain cults worshipped with secrecy and awe. The Orphic mysteries, said to be based on the teachings of Orpheus, spoke of the soul's journey beyond death, of cycles of rebirth, and of purity found through music and discipline. Their symbols were strange: eggs, snakes, and stars. Their hymns were soft, their truths whispered. Though little survives, the echoes suggest a deep desire to understand not just the gods, but the sacred structure of the soul itself. Even the sea had its altars. Sailors poured wine into the waves before a journey. They carved prayers into driftwood, cast tokens into the tide. Poseidon, ruler of oceans, was not to be taken lightly. His temples were often near cliffs, facing the endless blue. And in them, you could feel the tension, the wildness of a god who could offer safe passage or shatter ships with a flick of his wrist. To stand in a temple devoted to him was to feel very small, and very real. In time, temples aged. Their walls crumbled, columns fell, but the feeling remained. Even now, when walking among ruins, the air still shifts. A silence settles. The mind slows. Some part of the ancient ore lingers in the stones, in the way the light falls through broken archways, in the scent of time and dust. Modern visitors speak of it, the way sound changes, the way footsteps feel softer. The sacred, it seems, does not vanish. It waits. Not in grand declarations, but in the quiet between breaths. The Greeks believed that the gods were not separate from the world, but woven into it. The temples were not the only holy places. A grove, a mountaintop, a riverbank, all could be sacred. Wherever the heart paused in reverence, wherever the hand opened in offering, there the divine might be found. Beneath the temple vaults, the ancients placed not only statues and altars, but hopes. They asked for rain, for mercy, for love returned, for justice seen. They asked not because they expected answers, but because asking was a way of aligning with something greater, of remembering they were not alone. Now, as the night settles and your thoughts begin to slow, remember those ancient places. Imagine walking through cool stone halls, the scent of incense in the air, a faint echo of footsteps behind you. Imagine a flickering flame in the darkness, a whisper rising through the stillness, a presence that does not speak, but listens. And in that quiet, perhaps you'll hear it. Not a voice, not a command, just the feeling that the sacred was always near, and still is. Part 13. The River Remembers, Memory, Mourning, and the Passage of Time. There is a rhythm beneath all things, a slow, persistent flow that neither rushes nor rests. The Greeks imagined this rhythm not as a clock ticking nor as seasons turning, but as a river. Constant, deep, always moving forward, even as it carries everything that came before. Memory, to them, was not simply a flicker in the mind. It was a force, sacred, flowing, eternal. The past was not gone. It lived in stories, in rituals, in names spoken aloud. To forget was to lose more than knowledge. It was to lose connection to the gods, to ancestors, to purpose. And so, they revered the act of remembering just as they feared the quiet erosion of time. At the center of their beliefs about memory stood the river Lethe. One of the 5 rivers of the Underworld, Lethe was not violent. It did not burn or choke or roar. It offered forgetfulness, complete and irreversible. The souls who drank from Lethe lost all memory of their previous lives. In doing so, they were made ready for rebirth. A clean slate, a new beginning. But to lose memory, even in the hope of starting again, was not a simple decision. It was a surrender, a letting go of love, of loss, of everything that shaped the soul. In the Orphic traditions, some initiates were taught to avoid Lethe. Instead, they were told to seek out another river, Mnemosyne. This river, far less known outside the mystery cults, was the river of remembrance. To drink from it was to retain memory after death. Not just memory of one life, but the deep knowledge of many. It was believed that by remembering, the soul could break the cycle of rebirth and ascend into a truer form of being, one no longer bound by the wheel of time. To the Greeks, remembering was sacred, but mourning was holy. When someone died, their name was spoken aloud. Their body was prepared with care. Coins were placed beneath the tongue. Songs were sung, laments that did not just express sadness, but helped shape it into something bearable. These songs were often led by women, their voices rising and falling in grief. It was believed that proper mourning allowed the soul to move on. To be forgotten too quickly was a second death. Tombs were visited long after the body was laid to rest. Offerings were left: olive oil, wine, bread, flowers. The dead were not considered gone. They were still part of the family, still part of the city. The boundary between living and dead was not a wall, but a riverbank, thin, and often crossed in thought. The goddess Mnemosyne herself embodied this reverence for memory. She was not loud, not adorned with weapon or flame. Her power was quiet and vast. As the mother of the muses, she gave birth to poetry, music, history, and all forms of storytelling. Her presence reminded the world that every tale told, every name remembered, was an act of immortality. The muses, her daughters, each carried a different kind of memory. Calliope, muse of epic poetry, held the deeds of heroes. Clio guarded the truths of history. Erato stirred the hearts of lovers. Urania looked to the stars and saw the pattern of time written in light. They were not merely sources of inspiration. They were keepers of memory, divine echoes reminding mortals that to speak, to write, to sing, was to resist forgetting. In daily life, memory shaped everything. In Athens, great events were recalled in festivals and plays. The tragedies of Euripides and Aeschylus retold old wounds, not to reopen them, but to understand them. Their performances were not just entertainment, they were ritual. Through actors and chorus, the past became present, and the city reflected on its own shadow. Even in personal rituals, the act of remembering mattered. Before meals, families poured small libations to the ancestors. At shrines, names of the dead were carved in stone, not to mark endings, but to secure continuation. Children were named after grandparents. The cycle of remembrance moved through generations like a river through valley, sometimes dry, sometimes flooding, always present. But memory, the Greeks knew, could wound as well as heal. In myth, many figures are haunted by what they remember. Orestes cannot forget the murder of his father or the blood on his own hands. Medea remembers betrayal more vividly than love. Ajax, disgraced in battle, remembers his pride more than his reason, and it drives him to madness. These stories remind us that memory is not only golden. It can be sharp. It can return at night when all is quiet. Yet even the painful memories held value. They were not meant to be erased. Instead, they were carried, examined, and folded into identity. To mourn, then, was not weakness. It was strength. It was an act of clarity, a deliberate holding of the past in the presence of the now. The Greeks mourned communally. When a hero died, the city wept together. When a parent passed, neighbors joined in grief. When a child was lost, the gods themselves were invoked to hold the sorrow. There was no shame in tears, no rush to move on. Even the gods mourned. Demeter, when Persephone vanished, wandered the earth in agony. Her sorrow turned the world barren. Crops refused to grow. Trees held their fruit in silence. She did not suppress her grief. She let it bloom into winter. And in time, her mourning gave way to a deeper understanding, that loss and return were bound together. In another tale, Achilles mourns Patroclus not with words, but with fire. He builds a funeral pyre that burns high into the night. He weeps. He curses. He refuses food and comfort. His mourning is raw and terrible, and from it, he draws the strength to face his own end. There was no single way to mourn. Each loss asked something different, but all mourning served the same purpose: to connect, not only to the one lost, but to life itself. The passage of time was not measured in hours or days. It was marked by the heart. A moment could stretch like a season. A decade could pass in the space between breaths. The ancients believed that time was circular, not linear, that the same patterns returned again and again: birth, growth, decay, rebirth. The wheel turned, not to erase, but to continue. Even the seasons followed this dance. Spring was not new. It was returning. This cyclical view offered comfort. What is lost may return. What fades may flower once more. But it also asked for patience. Not all wounds heal quickly. Some memories take time to soften. The river does not rush. It bends. It pauses at stones. It reflects the sky. In the Orphic vision of the soul, each life was a journey down this river. And memory, both what was kept and what was let go, shaped the path. As night falls and thoughts grow quiet, imagine the river now. Its surface is calm, barely moving. You sit beside it, the earth cool beneath you. You watch the way the light dances across the water. Somewhere in its depths are your memories. Not in words, but in feeling. They drift, they shimmer, they remain. This river remembers every kindness, every goodbye, every laugh that lingered too long, and every silence that said more than words. It carries the names you've whispered in love and in mourning. It holds the echoes of stories told and retold. And as you sit there, not speaking, not reaching, you understand. You do not need to grasp them. They are already part of you. The river flows through you, not around. And in that, there is peace. So as you rest now, wrapped in quiet, let the river carry what you no longer need to hold tightly. Let it keep safe the memories that still burn gently. And trust that, even as time moves forward, nothing truly precious is ever lost. The river remembers. And so do you. Part 14. The Keeper of Shadows, Prophets, Priests, and the Cost of Knowing. There is a kind of knowledge that does not come from books or scrolls. It does not arrive with the rising sun or the shifting of the stars. Instead, it comes in silence, in trembling, in dreams one cannot explain. In ancient Greece, this kind of knowing was both feared and revered. It was the domain of the prophets and the priests, those who walked close to the gods, who listened when others turned away, and who carried truths too heavy for most to bear. These figures were known not for power or conquest, but for perception. They stood at the edges of certainty, watching the world not as it was, but as it might be. Some called them seers. Others called them mad. But all recognized their unique role. They were the keepers of shadows, guardians of what was unseen, unspoken, and often unbearable. The Greeks did not imagine prophecy as a clear path laid out in perfect order. Fate, they believed, spoke in riddles. The future whispered through symbols and signs, not commands. The gods did not reveal what would happen directly. Instead, they sent glimpses, warnings, and puzzles wrapped in metaphor. To be a prophet was to live between clarity and confusion. One of the most famous was Tiresias. Born in Thebes, he lived not one life, but two. According to legend, he once struck two mating snakes and was transformed into a woman. For 7 years, he lived in a female body, experiencing the world from another form. When he encountered the snakes again and repeated the act, he was changed back into a man. This experience made him valuable to the gods. When Zeus and Hera debated who experienced more pleasure in love, men or women, Tiresias was the only one who could speak from both sides. He sided with Zeus, and Hera, angered, struck him blind. But Zeus, in compassion or guilt, gave him a gift in return, the ability to see the future. Tiresias became a figure of strange wisdom, blind to the present, but able to see what lay ahead. He advised kings, guided heroes, and even appeared in the Underworld to counsel Odysseus. His words were never easy. They often brought sorrow, but they were rarely wrong. Another well-known prophetess was Cassandra, daughter of Priam, the king of Troy. She was given the gift of foresight by Apollo, who hoped to win her love. But when she rejected him, the god could not take back his gift. Instead, he twisted it. From that day forward, Cassandra would always speak the truth, and no one would believe her. She warned of the fall of Troy. She cried out against the wooden horse. She foresaw the fires, the deaths, the ruin. And yet, her people dismissed her words as madness. There is tragedy in her tale, not only in what she saw, but in her isolation. To see clearly and be unheard is a unique kind of torment. The cost of her knowing was not just sadness, but silence. In Delphi, the oracle spoke for Apollo. She was not born into her role. She was chosen. The Pythia, as she was called, sat on a tripod above a fissure in the earth. From it rose vapors, believed to be sacred, connecting her to the divine. In trance, she muttered words that priests would interpret for visitors who came from every corner of the ancient world. Kings did not go to war without her counsel. Cities were founded based on her visions. Philosophers, generals, and farmers all bent their knees to ask a question, always a question. But the answers were rarely simple. When Croesus, the wealthy king of Lydia, asked if he should attack Persia, the oracle replied that a great empire would fall. He took it as permission. He attacked. His empire was the one that fell. The oracle's words had been true, but not in the way he hoped. This is the nature of divine knowledge in the Greek world. It tells, but never plainly. It warns, but rarely directs. And always, it leaves room for interpretation. Prophets did not seek glory. They lived at the edges of society, often misunderstood, sometimes feared. They were consulted in times of crisis, then pushed aside when their words became inconvenient. Some were wanderers. Others lived in caves, in forests, in temples cut into mountainsides. Their lives were quiet, often lonely, but they carried a burden few could understand. To see the future was not always a gift. To know what would come, and to know it could not be changed, was a weight too heavy for many. There were also the priests and priestesses. Not all were seers. Many served in the temples, maintaining the rituals, offering guidance, caring for sacred objects. They were not chosen by accident. Their roles were often inherited or earned through years of study. They learned the sacred calendar, the correct prayers, the secret gestures, the names of forgotten deities. They memorized myths and recited them like living texts. When festivals were held, it was the priests who led the processions, who painted the bulls, who lifted the torches. They whispered the first word and the last. They held the silence between. In times of plague or drought, they were asked to interpret the will of the gods. In times of war, they were called to bless the weapons. In times of peace, they helped maintain it. But even in peace, their work was constant. They watched the stars, the birds, the way smoke curled from the altars. Omens came in every form. A sneeze, a shiver, the direction of wind. They did not claim power for themselves. They claimed to speak with, or for, the divine. Their robes were plain or elaborate, depending on the god. Their days were filled with ritual, with fasting, with waiting. Their nights were often sleepless. To be a priest in ancient Greece was to hold the center of a fragile balance. Too much pride, and you risked angering the gods. Too little presence, and the people lost faith. In certain cults, the line between human and divine grew thin. The priestess of Dionysus, in trance, might cry out words not her own. The servant of Demeter might walk barefoot for weeks, carrying the silence of harvest and sorrow. The followers of Orpheus might chant through the night, believing each tone brought them closer to purity. But always, there was a cost. To open oneself to the divine was to close the door on something else: comfort, ease, certainty. These roles were not taken lightly. They were not assigned for status. They were lived, carried, endured. And they asked for more than devotion. They asked for surrender. Even those outside the temples felt the touch of prophecy. In dreams, the gods might speak. In sudden fear, a warning might rise. People watched their children closely, listened to the words they muttered in sleep. A shepherd might find a snake coiled in a tree and see in it a sign. A mother might wake with a name on her lips and know it meant something. The world, they believed, was full of messages, but only a few could read them clearly. To be one of those few was to live apart. Not better, not above, just elsewhere. And sometimes, that distance hurt. The stories of these figures are not always joyful. Tiresias, wise and trusted, died without ceremony. Cassandra was taken as a slave, her voice still unheard. The Pythia, despite her central place in the temple, was often forgotten once her words were spoken. Their legacies remind us that knowledge, especially sacred knowledge, is not always accompanied by peace. It is a fire, beautiful, necessary, but dangerous to hold too closely. And yet, without these keepers of shadow, the myths would lose their depth. Without their voices, the gods would seem distant. Without their warnings, heroes would walk blindly. They offered not control, but clarity, not comfort, but vision. In their silence, there was meaning, and in their trembling, there was truth. Now, as the night deepens and your breath slows, imagine them again. The blind man in the city square, his voice soft but steady. The young woman in the temple, her hands open in offering. The old priest watching the wind, listening for the gods. They are not gone. Their wisdom lingers. Their stories echo. Their shadows remain. Not to frighten, but to remind. That knowing is not the end. It is the beginning of understanding. And sometimes, in the quiet, it is enough to listen, even if the meaning takes a lifetime to unfold. Part 15. The City That Dreams, the Legacy of the Myths. Beneath the sunlit stones of ancient cities, beyond the crumbling walls of temples long silent, and behind every painted vase and fading scroll, something lingers. Not just memory, not just history. It is something older, quieter, deeper. A presence made of story, shaped by breath, passed from voice to voice, dream to dream. This is the legacy of Greek myth. It does not sleep in museums. It lives in us. The myths were never meant to be frozen. They were never only records or dogma. They moved, just as rivers do. They flowed from one village to the next, changing as they traveled. A fisherman on one island might tell of Poseidon's wrath, while a farmer inland swore by Demeter's tears. Each tale adjusted slightly in the telling, bending toward the needs of the moment. What mattered was not rigid accuracy, but resonance. And so, myth became a kind of shared dreaming, a language of symbols, a mirror for understanding the world and our place in it. In the bustling Agora, where merchants bartered over amphorae of oil and children darted between olive stalls, these stories hung in the air. A mother calming her child might whisper of Heros' patience or Artemis's protection. A soldier sharpening his blade would remember Achilles and wonder whether glory was worth its cost. A sailor, watching the sea churn beneath his ship, might murmur a quick prayer to the winds, thinking of Odysseus still wandering somewhere beyond the horizon. The city itself seemed to hum with myth, not because gods walked its streets in visible form, but because people carried them inside, not as superstition, but as living narrative. In Athens, wisdom was not just a virtue. It was a story, carved in marble and spoken in law courts. In Sparta, strength was not merely training. It was shaped by tales of heroes who fell with honor. On islands, in mountain villages, along dusty roads where goats wandered and fig trees leaned toward the sun, myth stitched itself into every daily act. It was the air they breathed. As centuries passed, these stories did not vanish. They softened, took new shapes, moved into new languages. The gods were given Latin names. The myths were translated, reimagined, rewritten. But they remained. They found new homes in poetry, in paintings, in songs. They walked quietly into Shakespeare's lines. They stood tall in marble on the lawns of empires that came long after the temples fell. They whispered through the verses of romantic poets and flickered on the stages of modern theaters. And even now, they move through our stories. When a character wrestles with fate, we hear echoes of Oedipus. When someone gives everything to save another, we remember Prometheus. When a woman, doubted and dismissed, speaks truth no one believes, Cassandra's voice trembles in the background. These are not just old names. They are patterns, symbols, living threads. In a way, the city never stopped dreaming. It just changed its form. Modern cities, with glass towers and glowing screens, may seem far from the marble colonnades of the past. But look closer. The stories are still here. They've just put on new clothes. A child reading a fantasy novel discovers gods walking in disguise. A filmmaker retells the Odyssey in neon lights and jazz rhythms. A teacher draws comparisons between ancient battles and modern struggles. Each time the myth is remembered, it breathes again. The gods of old are not jealous. They do not need temples to feel alive. They only need to be seen, to be spoken, to be carried, quietly, in the human heart. There is something about these myths that remains especially human. They do not offer easy answers. They do not paint the world in black and white. Instead, they ask questions. What is the cost of knowing? What does it mean to be loyal? Where is the line between justice and vengeance? Why do we seek glory when it so often ends in sorrow? And in those questions, we find ourselves. The myths endure not because they are perfect, but because they are flawed, like us. The gods are jealous. They are petty. They are noble. They are kind. They make mistakes. They fall in love. They rage. They mourn. In their stories, we see not divine ideals, but reflections, distorted, yes, but familiar. And perhaps that is why we return to them. Not to learn what to be, but to understand what we already are. The city that dreams is not made of marble. It is built in the mind. It grows with every retelling. It lights up when a child hears the name Hercules for the first time. It stirs when someone whispers Aphrodite and thinks of longing. It wakes when two people argue about who was right, Agamemnon or Achilles, and realize the argument is really about pride and forgiveness and the pain of being misunderstood. This city has no fixed location. It exists wherever myth is remembered. It sleeps in the corners of libraries. It hides in the curve of a sculpture's shoulder. It waits in quiet pages, in old drawings, in the hush before a performance. And within that city, the myths still walk. Athena still considers justice in silence. Hades watches from his throne, not with cruelty, but with depth. Persephone walks between seasons, her step light, her gaze steady. And somewhere, a new Orpheus picks up a lyre and sings, not to charm gods, but to remind the world that music, too, can bring memory to life. Even now, even here, this dreaming continues. You have walked through the underworld and back. You have stood in temple courts, watched the stars rise over mountaintops, felt the cold edge of prophecy and the warm breath of hope. Each chapter has been a door. each name a key. And now, at the final threshold, you may find yourself looking not outward, but inward. What myths do you carry? What stories shape the way you love, or grieve, or endure? What heroes walk beside you in moments of doubt? What gods do you whisper to when no one is listening? The Greeks did not separate life from myth. They saw the sacred in the everyday. A well-placed stone became an altar. A passing bird became a sign. A broken heart became a reason to pray. And in that way of seeing, the world was richer, not because it was more magical, but because it was more meaningful. As you rest now, as sleep begins to soften your edges, remember this. You are not outside the myth. You are part of it. Your story, too, flows through the city that dreams. You carry it quietly, in the way you listen, in the way you remember. And someday, perhaps, someone else will speak your name in wonder. Not because you were perfect, but because you lived. You loved. You lost. And still, you walked forward, like so many before you, into the unknown, through the shadows, toward the light, where stories wait, where memory lingers, where the myth never ends, just turns the page, and begins again.